Hello everyone. You are listening Darkwood Tales podcast, and I am here to tell you true deep wood stories. Close your eyes and enjoy. The wind carried a faint laughter, chilling and hollow, curling around the trunks of black spruce, like smoke slipping through ancient cracks in forgotten walls. And I paused, just briefly, at the edge of the clearing, where the cracked wooden sign of Raven's Rest leaned against its last nail, weathered and bleeding rust, as though the forest itself had swallowed half its name and spit it out as a warning. I had never heard laughter like that before. Not joyful, not even mocking, but something loosed from the throat of the wilderness itself, worn thin with age and madness, too distant to place yet far too near to ignore. It echoed along the tree line with no source, a voice that was not a voice, rising in brief gasps, like the dying embers of a forgotten joke, and then silence, not the quiet kind that settles in after dusk, when owls stir and leaves begin their whispered conversations, but a strangled, unnatural absence of sound that pressed down on the world like a burial shroud. The lantern in my hand flickered, the flame pulling sideways, though the air was still, the glass panels fogging from the sudden cold that pooled around my ankles and crept beneath my coat like a wet, skeletal hand. My fingers, gloved but still trembling, tightened around the iron handle as I stepped beyond the rotted archway and into the trees, where the trail to the old campsites had all but vanished beneath a crust of moss and the slow crawl of undergrowth. My boots crunched on dry needles and broken twigs, every sound magnified in the oppressive hush, until even my breath seemed like an intrusion. The sky above had already gone that peculiar shade of bruise blue that only happens when clouds are thin and low, reflecting the last light of day like dirty snow, and the moon, bloated and yellow, hung behind the trees like a swollen eye, unblinking. They told me not to come alone, or maybe they didn't say it outright. But there were pauses in the conversation, long glances exchanged over steaming mugs, subtle shifts in tone when the name Raven's Rest came up, as though saying too much would stir something ancient and listening just beneath the surface. I've learned to hear things in silences, as any medium does. It's the space between words that speaks the loudest, and Raven's Rest had been speaking in gaps for decades. A pine cone cracked beneath my heel, and the sound made me flinch. It was foolish, I told myself. Just the weight of the woods settling on the bones of a city girl playing ghost hunter. But the truth was, even before the laughter, something had felt wrong. The forest didn't just surround you here, it folded in on you, as though each tree were leaning just a hair too far, listening just a moment too long. And the longer I walked, the more I felt like I wasn't walking into the woods. I was being drawn in. They'd sent me because I was sensitive, which was their way of saying that I saw things other people didn't. Felt the residue of pain clinging to old places like mildew to damp stone. The job sounded simple on paper. Investigate reports of strange disappearances. No bodies found, only campfires left cold, tents empty, shoes neatly placed beside burnt-out coals like the owners had stepped out and forgotten to return, but I knew better. The forest keeps what it wants. The trail turned left, then split, then disappeared altogether beneath a carpet of lichen. I held up the lantern and turned in a slow circle. Behind me, the path was gone, not just overgrown, erased. I knew the direction I had come, but looking back, the trees seemed older, thicker, wrong somehow, as though I had passed into a different grove entirely. Without knowing, my heart beat faster. There was something in the air, a smell that didn't belong, not rot, though that was there too, in the sweet cloying way that dead wood sometimes smells in late autumn, but something cleaner, metallic almost, like the inside of a surgical mask or the tang of blood in your nose. After a high fever, it caught in the back of my throat, unfamiliar and unsettling, and for a moment I thought I might be ill. Then the laughter came again. Closer this time, not directly ahead. Off to the left, perhaps. But the acoustics of this place made direction meaningless. The sound slipped through the trees like it knew the way better than I did. I turned, not because I wanted to, but because it felt like I had to. My legs obeyed before my mind could protest, and the lantern swung to cast long, swaying shadows that moved like they were breathing. A cluster of birch trees stood to my right, their pale bark peeling in curls, and on the nearest one, I saw it, a face, not human, not exactly, but not animal either, just a shape warped into the trunk by rot and weather and the stretch of imagination, but unmistakably a face, long hollow eyes, mouth parted in a soundless scream, and the faintest suggestion of fingernails gouged below it, as if someone had tried to claw their way inside the tree. I staggered back and nearly dropped the lantern. The glass clinked sharply, and the flame guttered, and then something brushed past the nape of my neck. Not wind, not wind. It was cold, freezing, impossibly so, and wet, like the breath of something that had been buried in snow. I spun, lantern held high, but there was nothing there, nothing but trees and darkness, and the creaking sound of bark under pressure. I stood very still. My own breath came in short clouds. A sound began, a low rasping, somewhere between a sigh and a groan, rising from beneath the forest floor, like something waking from too long a sleep. And still, no birds, no insects, no life. The flame inside the lantern steadied, then dimmed, as if being slowly choked. I brought it closer to my chest, seeking warmth that wasn't there. The light barely reached the tips of my boots now, swallowed by the night, like sugar in black tea. I had to keep moving. I don't know how long I walked. Minutes, maybe hours. Time seemed to stretch and twist inside this place, knotted like the roots that rose from the earth, like the bones of the dead. The deeper I went, the more the forest changed. Trees bent at impossible angles. The air grew colder. The path narrowed to a crawl space between gnarled trunks, and the ground beneath my feet grew soft and yielding, like flesh. And then I saw it. The first campfire ring, cold, dead. The stones blackened with soot, but the ash inside still warm. A pair of boots sat beside it, toes pointed outward, laces neatly tied, no sign of a tent, no belongings. Just the fire pit, the boots, and silence. The wind shifted, and from behind the trees, just beyond the edge of the lantern's glow, came that laughter again, closer now, slower, hungrier. I should have run then, but I didn't, because something in that sounded like me. The boots by the fire hadn't moved. They sat there, untouched, toes still pointing out toward the dark, as though their owner had simply risen and wandered off. Not in panic, but in some quiet, willing trance. The ashes inside the fire ring glowed faintly, not with warmth, but with the memory of heat, like a breath had only just passed over them. I crouched beside it, careful not to disturb the pattern, and felt for any lingering pulse beneath the stones. There was none, only the silence of things long gone. Something in the air shifted again, a subtle pressure, like the forest was exhaling around me, or watching more closely. The laughter had stopped. That should far comforted me, but instead it left a void, a vacuum where sound should have been. I rose slowly, lantern trembling in my hand, casting frail light in every direction, revealing nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no trail beyond the one I'd followed. It was as if the forest had unspooled itself behind me, reweaving the path into something unknowable. I turned in place, a slow spiral, trying to find an anchor, anything that resembled direction. But all I saw was more trees, more night, more nothing. I called out once, "Hilo," and immediately regretted it. The word didn't echo, it just vanished, swallowed up in the moss-thick air, like the breath of the disappeared. Then from the shadows between the trees came a sound unlike the others. Not laughter, not wind, a single wet snap, like the breaking of a wishbone. I froze. It hadn't been far. Maybe 20 feet, maybe less. I turned the lantern toward the noise, the glass fogging slightly with the temperature shift. The light reached a cluster of trees, their trunks wrapped in vines so thick they looked swollen, their bark blistered with patches of white mold. Something about them felt wrong, not in the obvious way. No blood, no bones, no figures lurking in the half-light. But in the shape of them, the trees leaned away from each other, unnaturally bowed, like they were recoiling from something I couldn't see, or maybe hiding something at their base. I stepped closer. The forest floor was soft here, not with mud, but with decay. A spongy layer of decomposed leaves, and something else, something sour beneath it. A rot that wasn't of earth. The air was thick with it now, a coppery tang that made the back of my throat clench and my tongue feel heavy. Another snap, closer this time, not quite bone, not quite wood, something in between. I raised the lantern again, and that's when I saw it. A fresh gouge across the bark of the nearest tree, not made by an animal. not claw marks. It looked like something had been dragged down the trunk. Something with nails or fingers. There were scratches in the dirt. 2 parallel lines. Faint, as if someone had been pulled. No blood, just the suggestion of struggle and something else. Half buried under a scatter of pine needles. A bracelet, silver chain, delicate, crusted with grime, a charm in the shape of a bird, raven, maybe. I picked it up without thinking, and the moment my skin touched metal, the air shifted again, sharper, colder, and then came the breath. That same cold draft, colder than it should have been, brushing the back of my neck like someone leaning too close. I spun around, lantern swinging wildly, casting mad shadows across the trees. Nothing, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Was in the woods with me. And it wasn't hiding, it was circling. I turned back to the fire pit, and the boots, and froze. They were gone. Not shifted, not knocked over, just gone. The ash in the ring was cold now. Truly cold, and the outline of the boots remained in the dirt. But they themselves had vanished as if swallowed whole by the ground. I backed away slowly, my breath catching, ears straining for any sound, any clue that I wasn't imagining it, that I hadn't simply looked away and tricked myself. Then came a creaking, wood under pressure, not trees swaying in the breeze, but a single, deliberate groan, like a floorboard being stepped on. I lifted the lantern again. In the distance, past the ring of pale trees, something moved. I didn't see it directly, just the motion, like branches being pushed aside by something larger than a deer, something taller. The forest didn't want me to see it yet, but it wanted me to know it was there. I took a step back. Then another. The lantern dimmed again. Something about the light wasn't right. It pulsed slightly, as though breathing in rhythm with the forest. The deeper I went, the more erratic it became. I stumbled into another clearing. No fire pit this time. Just a small ring of stones, and within it, a pile of charred feathers. Birds, maybe, their bodies completely burned away. But the smell, oh God, the smell, it was acrid, foul, a mix of melted fat and something sweeter, like perfume poured over a carcass. I gagged, pulling my coat up over my mouth. In the center of the feathers, something lay waiting. A single photograph, untouched by ash. It showed a woman standing at the edge of the very woods I now stood in. Same crooked sign, same leaning trees. Her face was half in shadow, but the curve of her jaw, the angle of her shoulders, the scar just beneath her left eyebrow. It was me, taken from behind. My breath caught in my throat as I clutched the photo, turning in place, scanning every direction. My heart pounded like a drum in a sealed coffin. I hadn't taken this. I hadn't posed. Someone had been here, watching, long before I arrived. A branch cracked behind me. I turned, and this time I saw it, not clearly, not entirely. but just enough. Between the trunks of two massive pines, tall and skeletal, something shifted, its outline barely distinguishable from the trees themselves, except for the eyes, hollow, luminous, set deep into a face, not made of flesh, but bark. Split, ragged bark, soaked through with something that moved too slowly to be sap. The ghost bark, horror. I didn't breathe, didn't move. The lantern in my hand flickered once, then died. Darkness swallowed me whole, and something stepped forward. I didn't scream, not because I was brave, because I couldn't. The moment the lantern gave out, and that thing moved, the scream rose in my throat, but found no air to ride on, no path to follow. It caught like a stone behind my ribs and lodged there, pulsing with my racing heart. The darkness was complete. It didn't feel natural. It felt deliberate, thick and tactile, like drapery pulled tight around me. I raised my hand in front of my face and saw nothing. The trees were gone. The ground was gone. Everything around me dissolved into an endless, pressing black, except for the sound, not the laughter, that had vanished. This was different. Scraping, soft and rhythmic, like bark against bark, or the wet hiss of something being peeled. Closer, and beneath it, a slow, steady inhale, ragged and wet, like a lung that hadn't drawn breath in centuries, remembering how. Then came a whisper. Not a voice, not quite, but the impression of one, like a thought too loud in your own head, shaped from breath and leaves, and the low murmur of roots stretching underground. Laura. My knees nearly buckled. I never told it my name. Something brushed past my shoulder. I turned, blind, helpless, and reached instinctively for the lantern, fumbling in my coat pocket for the box of matches. My hands shook as I struck one, and the flare of light was blinding, searing, alive with the desperation of my need. In that moment, as the flame flared and caught the wick, I saw it, a figure just beyond the trees, half-formed and still, its skin, or what passed for it, blending with the trunks, its head cocked too far to the side, like it was studying me through the eyes of something that had long forgotten how to blink. And then it was gone. The flame steadied. The lantern sputtered to life again, casting its thin amber light over the clearing, which had changed. The photograph was gone. So were the feathers. In their place, a shallow pit, half filled with water, black and still. I approached slowly, unsure why I didn't just run. Maybe because I knew there was no path back. Because somewhere, deep in my bones, I understood the forest had closed its mouth around me. I knelt beside the water and looked down. At first, I saw nothing, just my reflection, trembling and warped by ripples I hadn't made. But then the water calmed, and I saw another face. Not mine, gaunt. Eyes like cracks in a frozen lake, a mouth that didn't move but stretched endlessly into a grimace of pain. The reflection watched me, Then the water rippled again and spoke, not aloud, not in words, but in images, a memory not mine. A boy, no older than 12, standing in the clearing at dusk, a small fire crackling behind him, laughter in the trees, something moving fast between the trunks. Then a hand, thin, bark-like, fingers too long, reaching from above, descending from the canopy. The boy never screamed. The memory broke, like glass. I fell back, panting, and the light around me flickered violently, as if the lantern were reacting to the truth. Something in this forest remembered, and now it remembered me. I rose unsteadily and turned to leave, though I had no sense of direction anymore. The trees looked the same in every direction, too tall, too narrow, leaning in like sentinels with secrets. But I picked a path and walked. The forest changed again, subtly. At first, a thrum beneath my boots, like the heartbeat of something vast and unseen. The moss grew thicker, spongier, branches hung lower, snagging my coat and hair with greedy fingers. Fungi bloomed in strange shapes on the bark. Faces, maybe, or masks. And then the campfires began again, one after another, each one colder than the last, some recent, some ancient, some surrounded by neatly arranged stones, others strewn with the remnants of rushed departure, folded maps, crushed cans, children's toys. Always the same absence, always the same quiet. And then I found the circle, a wide ring of trees, unnaturally spaced, their trunks forming a near-perfect perimeter. In the center, a massive stump, rotted and hollow, thick with vines and lichen around it. Dozens of footprints, bare, small, some child-sized, circling the stump again and again until the earth was worn smooth. I stepped forward, and the moment my boot crossed the invisible line into the circle, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The flame dimmed, guttered, but didn't die. Something hummed inside the stump, a low, pulsing vibration. Felt more than heard. I moved closer, my breath fogging in the frigid air. As I leaned in, the vines began to twitch. Slowly at first, then faster, coiling and tightening like muscles beneath skin. Then one opened an eye, pale, milky, human. I stumbled back, and every vine followed, twisting to watch me. Hundreds of pale orbs blinking from within the knotwork of growth. Something was inside the stump, trapped or sleeping or feeding. The laughter returned, soft, almost sorrowful, not from the trees, from below. A crack opened in the base of the stump, slow and deliberate, as if the wood was being pulled apart from within. I stepped back again, hand on the lantern, heart thudding, throat dry. Something was coming up. Not quickly, not violently, just inevitably. The forest held its breath, and I took mine. I don't know how long I stood there, holding that breath. The forest offered no cues, No chirping insects, no rustling of animals, not even the soft groan of branches in wind, just that silence again. Total, oppressive, suffocating. The kind of silence that fills the body like smoke, pressing against the ribs and behind the eyes, making it impossible to know whether the pressure is coming from outside or if it's building from within. The stump had stopped opening. The vines had gone still. Though I could still feel the eyes. They weren't blinking anymore, just watching, hundreds of them. Motionless. Patient, I took one slow step back. The earth beneath my boot gave a softness I hadn't noticed before, and a wet, sucking sound whispered up through the moss. I looked down and saw the faintest glint of moisture pooling around the heel. Something dark, not water, not quite. It smelled metallic. I moved back further, circling the outer ring of the tree circle, careful not to disturb anything. The light from my lantern seemed dimmer now, even though the flame hadn't changed. It cast less distance, like the shadows were swallowing the light before it could stretch beyond a few feet. Beyond that, just dense forest, ever the same, infinite in every direction. But something was different. The forest didn't feel empty anymore. Somewhere in the distance, somewhere ahead, I heard it again, a sound like a rope tightening. No, not rope, sinew, twisting, drawing taut, and under it, the faint sound of a voice, soft, rhythmic, barely discernible, beneath the thrum of distant breathing, a chant, old, wrong, foreign to the tongue, but familiar to the bones. I moved toward it, not quickly. I didn't want to draw attention, though. Part of me suspected I already had it. Whatever was here had known I was coming. It had called me, hadn't it? From the moment I'd heard about the disappearances, about the strange lights and the vanishing campfires, the forest had whispered, and I'd listened. And now I was walking deeper. The terrain changed beneath my feet, more uneven now, roots rising like the backs of ancient serpents, knotted and gnarled, some split open with black rot that bled a thick, tarry substance. Others had faces, carvings, faces, frozen in expressions of horror or peace. It was impossible to tell, half swallowed by bark, lips stretched wide in the suggestion of sound. I didn't stop. I didn't let myself look at them too long. The light from the lantern made them twitch at the corners. Soon the trees opened. Another clearing. But this one was wrong. Not just unnatural, impossible. It was a perfect circle. Too perfect, too symmetrical, to be shaped by time or wind or even fire. At the center stood a totem, a pillar of fused roots and bone, rising 10 feet high, wrapped in strips of old clothing, charms made of hair and teeth dangling from twine around the base. 7 small mounds of earth, graves, maybe, or offerings. Each one bore a marker. Each marker had a name, and the third one down bore mine. Laura, may she never return. My legs weakened, my breath came sharp and fast now, but I couldn't look away. The soil around the mounds was freshly disturbed. The names were burned into the wood, precise, deliberate, waiting for me. I turned, ready to flee, and stopped. The path I'd come down was gone, not overgrown, not hidden, but not in its place. Nothing. Stood more trees, new trees, pale and smooth like bone, rising straight and silent, roots writhing gently in the soil, as if searching for something. Behind me, something groaned. I looked back. The totem was bleeding, a dark, slow ooze dripping from the center seam. Blacker than pitch, the charms swung more violently now, as if caught in a wind I couldn't feel. The names on the markers glowed faintly. One by one, the grave mounds began to sink. The earth drew downward like something beneath was inhaling. I stepped back, stumbled, caught myself. My lantern wavered in my hand, the glass fogging from within, as if some breath was exhaling from inside it now. The light bent strangely, stretching shapes across the clearing that didn't belong to me. Faces where there should be none, eyes along the ground, along the trunks, watching, always watching. The chant rose again, louder now, from every direction. From below, the names on the markers flared, the one with mine cracked down the middle, with a sharp, splintering sound, and I felt something twist in my gut, like a tether pulling taut between the wood and my chest. I fell to my knees. The breath was back, cold, too close. Fingers brushed my hair, slow and deliberate. A voice in my ear, no louder than leaves shifting against bark. Not yet. I turned, but no one was there. Only the totem, now glowing faintly from within, the black ooze moving faster, bleeding into the ground. The mound with my name was nearly gone. I stumbled to my feet and fled, not toward any path, but into the only space that wasn't closing, forward, deeper. The forest accepted me. It opened for me, and behind me the clearing sighed shut. I lost all sense of time, how long I walked. I can't say. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. The woods didn't mark time like the world outside. The light from the lantern became the only constant, and even that had begun to falter, dimming with every breath, its flame feeding on air that no longer felt like mine to breathe. The deeper I moved, the more the forest closed in, not just physically, but in presence. It no longer felt like a place. It felt like a mind aware and ancient and slowly awakening around me. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. Whispers crept along the edges of my hearing. Not voices, not quite, just syllables, dragged from old soil and hollow bark, patterns of sound with meaning, buried so deep it could only be understood by trees older than memory. I tried humming, tried speaking aloud to drown them, but my own voice sounded wrong here, too sharp, too fast, like breaking glass in a cathedral. The trees changed again, thinner now, and taller. They rose like spears, their trunks a pale gray, that shimmered faintly in the lantern light. No leaves overhead, only an endless mesh of branches, interwoven so tightly the sky had vanished completely. What little light there was came from the moss below, faintly bioluminescent, casting the world in a sickly green haze. The air stank of wet bark and rotting things that had never been fully alive. I passed a mound of tangled roots that pulsed like a throat and exhaled steam when I came too close. Things moved inside it. I didn't look again. There was a rhythm to the forest now, a pulse, low and distant, like the heartbeat of something buried far beneath the roots. It seemed to guide my steps, though whether I followed willingly or was drawn, I couldn't say. That's when I saw the first campfire. It wasn't lit, only the remains, a blackened circle of stone, damp logs, a scorched patch of moss, but it was recent. The footprints around it were clear in the soil. Small and many children, barefoot. I knelt and brushed away the debris, revealing something glinting beneath the ash, a silver locket, tarnished, but still warm to the touch, as though someone had only just left it there. I opened it slowly. 2 photographs. A girl, maybe 10, and beside her, a woman with the same sharp chin and deep-set eyes. The girl was missing an eye, not in injury, just absent, an empty socket in the photo itself, as if something had reached into the image and erased it from within. I dropped the locket and stepped back. Then the laughter returned, but it was different now. Not distant, not faint. It was close, somewhere behind the trees to my left. A child's giggle echoed, sharp and wet, like a sound made through water. I spun, lantern raised high, but saw only the thin trees and the moss below, undisturbed. Then to the right, another laugh, closer, then directly behind me. I turned just in time to see movement, something small and pale darting between 2 trees, gone before the lantern's light could catch it. I froze, barely breathing. The silence returned, but not true silence, the kind that waits, watches, then ahead. Another campfire, recent again, this one still smoldering. The last threads of smoke curling upward into the branch-webbed dark. Something sat beside it, a doll, weathered, face-stained, one arm missing, mouth sewn shut, with thick black thread on its chest, a name stitched in fading pink. Emmy. I bent down, reached for it, and felt a hand close around my ankle. Cold, small, strong. I fell, the lantern clattering from my grasp, its light spinning wildly across the clearing. Shadows danced like broken limbs on every tree. I kicked, screamed, tore myself free, and scrambled back. But there was nothing there, only the moss, soft and undisturbed. No prints, no dents, no trace of what had touched me. The doll was gone. The smoldering wood was soaked through. The moss had begun to whisper. I staggered to my feet and fled deeper into the trees, driven not by logic, but by instinct, some animal part of me that knew this place had changed again, and staying meant becoming part of it. The trees began to bend inward. Their trunks arched overhead, forming a tunnel that stretched further than the lantern's reach. It smelled of mold and blood and fire long burned out. I stepped inside. The tunnel swallowed sound. Each footstep became a memory instead of a noise. The air tasted of iron. My skin itched, then burned, then numbed. My thoughts began to fracture, not scatter, not vanish, fracture, like shards of myself falling behind with every step. And then the tunnel ended. I emerged into a clearing, unlike the others. This one was circular, but inverted, concave, like the inside of a bowl. The ground dipped toward a wide depression at the center, and at the bottom lay a tree unlike any I'd seen before. Twisted, charred black, dead, but not still. Its bark moved, not from wind, from within, as though its skin rippled with breath. Its roots rose like skeletal hands grasping upward, and around them the remnants of dozens, no, hundreds of campfires arranged in concentric rings, each ring closer to the tree, each ring darker. The innermost fires were burned black, not from wood, but from something else, something that left behind a residue that shimmered and hissed when my light touched it. The air grew colder. The cold breath returned, down the back of my neck, and this time, I didn't turn. I whispered a name I hadn't meant to remember. Ghost bark. I was standing on it. The realization took the air from my lungs. It was a body, and I was inside its breath. I didn't scream. I wanted to. I wanted to tear my throat open with the sound. But the forest had stolen that too. Even my panic felt muffled here, contained like a fevered child trapped beneath heavy blankets. The lantern sputtered, throwing long, trembling shadows against the sloped bowl around me. And for 1 second, I thought they were people, huddled, kneeling, worshipping. But they weren't. They were trunks, black, warped things growing downward into the hollow. Their bark flayed in long strips that peeled like flesh. Some of them bore the shapes of arms, some had teeth, and all of them leaned toward the tree at the center. The ghost bark, it didn't move like a tree. It pulsed slowly, like something breathing beneath the crust of a dying world. Its bark shifted in slow spirals, revealing brief glimpses of red beneath, like meat seen through broken skin. And the roots, it wasn't just grasping at the campfire rings. It was feeding on them. They pulsed with the same rhythm, like arteries ferrying blood toward the trunk, toward the mouth. Yes, it had a mouth, not visible in shape, not obvious like jaws or lips, but a hollow, just below the thickest section of trunk, where the bark never quite sealed, black and wet and breathing. I felt it, drawing the air, felt my clothes rustle toward it. With every silent inhale, I should have turned back. I knew I should have, but there was something just past the base of the tree, half buried in the ash and moss, a circle of stone, not a fire pit, a mirror, round, framed in iron, twisted with roots. The glass had cracked into 9 perfect wedges, like the iris of some massive eye that had been broken by a gaze too strong. It reflected nothing but sky. Sky I hadn't seen in hours. Sky that didn't belong to this forest. And in the center, something moved. It was a silhouette, my own, at first glance. A woman, standing tall and motionless, at the far end of the mirror's reflection. She did not blink, did not breathe, but she was closer. Now, I took a step back. The reflection did not. I looked down, but the mirror held only her. No trace of me, just that slow, steady advance from a world beyond the glass. Her hair hung wet. Her hands were wrong, too long, too many joints. And her mouth smiled wider than it should have. She mouthed something. I didn't hear it, but I felt it in my bones. You're the last light, Laura. Come home. I turned to flee and tripped on something just beneath the soil. My hand sank into soft, wet earth, warm, almost fevered, and came up, clutching cloth, a jacket. Small, blue, Emmy's. It was soaked through, the threads black with something that smelled of rust and fungus. The ground below it trembled. A thin root slithered up and through the sleeve, wearing it like skin. I staggered back. The ground shifted again. And then I heard them. Footsteps. Dozens. Hundreds. Padding soft against moss. Wet against leaves. Dragging and crawling and limping through the brush around the bowl. Eyes bloomed in the trees. Tiny at first. Then larger. Higher. Closer. They circled. No. They danced. Figures emerged. Just beyond the edge of the clearing. Human shapes. But not whole. Hollowed, ragged, their limbs bending wrong. Their eyes white and empty. Some still wore scraps of camping gear, jackets, backpacks, even a girl with a whistle fused into her throat. They watched me with the mournful patience of something too far gone to remember fear. Then the laughter came again, the same hollow giggle, warped by bark and rot, echoed from every mouth at once. The ghost bark horror shuddered and opened. The hollow at its center tore wide with a wet, cracking sound that echoed through the bowl. Inside roots, lined with teeth, tongues of splintered wood, the scent of rot, so powerful, it crushed the breath from my chest. The figures began to move, swaying in time with the forest's heartbeat. One by one, they dropped to their knees and prayed, not with words, with blood. Each reached toward themselves, tearing skin with nails and teeth, pressing their hands into the soil to feed it. The ground drank eagerly. The ghost bark pulsed stronger. Its breath filled my ears, my lungs, my mind, and from the mirror, the woman had stepped through. She stood no more than 10 paces away now. Not walking, gliding. Her feet did not disturb the moss. Her eyes, my eyes, were filled with smoke. She smiled. Behind her, the figures raised their heads in unison, and from their mouths, in perfect hollow unison, came a voice I knew. Your fire burns last. The mirror cracked. Further, the mouth of the tree widened, the forest waited, and I was still walking forward. I didn't feel my feet move. I didn't remember choosing to walk. The bole's curve rose behind me, like the closing lip of a trap, and the forest's breath had become my rhythm. Every step pulsed in time with it, like my body had relinquished the burden of decision and fallen into lockstep with something older than will. My limbs obeyed, but not me. The other Laura, the woman from the mirror, drifted closer, and the distance between us now felt like little more than a breath held too long. Her skin had the pallor of ash, the slight shimmer of something not entirely solid. Her fingers twitched at her sides, as if they strained to hold themselves still. I looked into her eyes and saw not smoke, not shadow, but reflection. My own expression stared back, blurred slightly, as though seen through water, but it was wrong. She was smiling. She was hungry. Behind her, the ghostbark horror's mouth remained open, yawning wider, as if sensing the inevitable moment when my last bit of resistance would fail. The roots that encircled its base now writhed more actively, thick ropes of twisted wood curling and uncurling with grotesque patience. The trees that leaned inward toward the clearing seemed to sway closer with every breath, as if drawn in by gravity, or perhaps reverence. I tried to speak. My lips parted. Nothing came out. The air had become thick, syrupy, clotted with rot, and something worse. Something that lived inside the breath itself. Words didn't belong here. Only submission did. And then I felt it. The cold breath on my neck. No sound. No footsteps. No wind. Just that breath. Slow, measured, real. But when I turned, there was no one there. Only the dark space between two mossy, half-dead trees. A place light had never touched, and then a whisper came from it. Clear and dry and low. Not yet. I froze. The woman before me faltered. Her head twitched to the side, like a broken puppet caught on the wrong line. Her mouth opened, and I saw the void within it. No tongue, no teeth, just a tunnel of splinters and smoke. She hissed something that turned the moss black where it fell. The mirror behind her cracked again, a spiderweb of fractures racing toward the edges. The forest had blinked. For the first time, something had interfered. Something else watched. I stepped back. 1 foot, 2. She followed. But now I could see it. Barely. The flicker of something in the trees above. Not an owl. Not a bird. Not a thing. An absence. A shape. Not shaped. It blinked in and out. Watching. She hissed again. Sharper now. And the ground trembled. The kneeling figures twitched. Several raised their arms toward the ghostbark horror and began to hum. The sound was hideous. A buzzing dirge made of breath and bone and wind through hollow throats. Roots erupted from the ground. Long barbed tendrils burst through the soil and snaked toward me. I ran not toward the edge of the bowl, not toward escape, but sideways, toward the shattered mirror. The crackling glass reflected a world I did not understand. But in it, I did not see her. I saw only me, alone in the bowl, mouth open in a scream I had not made. I dropped to my knees and pressed my hands to the glass. It was warm. The reflection flickered. The woman, the thing cried out in a voice that rattled, bark from the surrounding trees. The roots lashed out again, one grazing my leg with a kiss of cold fire. But I stayed. I leaned in, and I whispered something. Not in English. Not in thought. Something deeper. Older. I didn't know the words until they passed my lips. The mirror opened, not like a door, like a wound. A gash tore through the center, splitting the glass along its fractures, and the forest howled. The clearing shuddered. The kneeling husks screamed in chorus, and the ghost bark horror recoiled. For the first time, it feared. The woman lunged, mouth open, arms clawing through the air, like a thing unhinged. But before she reached me, the shape in the trees dropped. It fell like silence. It landed between us, with no sound, no weight, and no form. She saw it. She knew it, and she fled, back toward the tree, into its waiting mouth. The bark closed behind her. The mirror shattered, and I was alone again. Except I wasn't. The shape stood beside me, not touching, not breathing, not defined, but present. It whispered again, "Not yet." I blinked. The clearing was empty. The fire pits gone, the bowl shallow, but the taste in the air was the same, and the moss beneath my feet still pulsed, still breathed, still waited. And so did I, because I knew the ghost bark horror hadn't left. It had only seen me, and now it would wait for nightfall. The wind had gone still again. No rustle, no whisper, just that waiting silence, pregnant with breath that never came. I stood at the edge of the hollow, my body coated in a sheen of sweat that clung like fog, the weight of everything that had almost happened pressing into my chest like a stone. The ghost bark horror was hidden once more, its mouth sealed, its supplicants vanished. But the forest around me had changed. It was listening now. The trees leaned subtly inward, their branches low and gnarled like arthritic arms stretching out to touch. I dared not speak, not even to myself. My own thoughts seemed too loud. I moved only when necessary, each step deliberate, avoiding roots, stepping over stones like I was tiptoeing across a sleeping beast's spine. The lantern was nearly dead. Its glow had shrunk to a faint, trembling core that barely pushed back the dark. And the batteries, I hadn't replaced them in hours. The rational part of me knew they should have died already. But something here, something fed it just enough. Knock. To help. To watch. I emerged from the clearing and followed the trail uphill, deeper into the denser woods. Raven's Rest had long since vanished behind me. The sign rotted and buried beneath moss, its name now only a ghost in my memory. I passed no other trails. No markers, only the occasional forgotten relic. An old thermos rusted shut, a child's sock, a damp tent with its seams split like scars. The deeper I went, the more these remnants appeared, scattered as if dropped in a hurry, or torn away by something that didn't need to chase. I began to notice the trees bleeding. Not sap, blood. At first it was dry, dark brown stains at the base of trunks, thin streaks along grooves in the bark, but then it grew fresher, thicker. Smelling of iron and rot, I paused before one old pine that had a crude spiral carved into its side, an ancient curling shape I'd seen before back in my books, in the margins of old protection spells corrupted by age and desperation. This one wept. I reached out, half in a trance, and touched the cut. Warm, not sticky, but slick, like it was alive beneath the surface. The tree trembled faintly. I pulled my hand back, too late. A whisper coiled around my ear, so close it felt like lips brushing skin. Not yours. I spun, but nothing was there. No footsteps behind me, no signs of life. Only the faint sound of something soft and wet moving deeper in the trees, just out of sight, not running, not even walking, just dragging, trailing. I pressed on. The trail narrowed, sloped sharply, then opened into a glade I hadn't seen on any map, a strange circular clearing, rimmed by stones stacked in uneven cairns, each one crowned by a skull. Animal, mostly deer, fox, owl. One was human. In the center, a fire pit, still warm. Knock, coals, not flame, just warmth, as if the fire had gone out only minutes ago. Even though there were no fresh footprints, no signs of recent life, only the ashes, piled high and moving. Something beneath them shifted. I crouched, hand trembling, as I reached toward the center and found bones, tiny, white fragments, child-sized, burned, broken. I stood too fast and staggered back, breath catching, heart slamming like a fist against my ribs. My vision blurred, and in it, I saw the trees tilt again, not sway, lean, as if drawn to the heat of memory. Then the ground cracked. A root thrust up from beneath the ashes, wrapped in char and hair. It writhed, sniffing the air. It knew me. It recognized me. I turned to run, but there, blocking the path back, stood a man. At least, I think he once was. He was tall, gaunt, skin drawn tight across a face, so pale it was nearly translucent. Moss clung to his jaw, fungus bloomed across one shoulder. His eyes were wide, yellowed, and empty, yet they watched me with the calm of a priest mid-sermon. He raised a hand, one finger crooked in a gesture of silence. "The fire forgets," he said softly. His voice was wrong, hollow, not echoing from the trees, but through them, as if he were only their mouthpiece. But the roots remember. Behind him, the trees groaned. One bent low enough to crack its own spine, splintering in a wet explosion of sap and bone. From the break, something emerged, no more than a shape covered in bark, crawling. It had no face, but it wore my coat. The man, the prophet, stepped aside and let it pass. It moved toward me slowly, as if relearning how to walk. And I remembered that night, the dream I thought I'd had years ago, lost in the woods, alone, waking up with dirt under my nails, pine needles in my mouth. Had I come here before? Had I already died once? The wind returned, and with it, the breath, cold, soft, right behind me again. And then laughter, all around, dozens of voices, none of them human, none of them far. I ran without thinking, my legs moving, not from choice, but from some wild instinct, clawing its way up from the base of my spine, demanding escape, demanding distance from whatever it was that wore my coat and moved like a memory too long buried. But the forest had turned against me. Every path I once knew now twisted into alien shapes, the trees curling inward, their roots rising like ribs from the earth to trip and tangle, to lead me back to the glade, back to the bones, back to him. His voice still rang in my ears. The fire forgets, the roots remember. A mantra now repeated, not by him, but by the forest itself. The wind whispered it between branches. The leaves repeated it in their trembling. Even the birds, what few remained, seemed to call the words in strange, syncopated shrieks. I covered my ears. It didn't help. I burst into a dry riverbed, lined with slick stone and patches of lichen that pulsed faintly under the moonlight, like a heartbeat. I collapsed onto my knees and vomited bile and ash. The taste was wrong. It had the flavor of old wood and forgotten names, names that tasted like mine. I was not alone. Ahead, in the crook of a fallen tree, someone sat, a woman, or what had once been a woman. Her skin was bark now, split and weeping. Her hair had turned to dry moss, draping in strings over her hollowed eyes. She held something in her lap, a small bundle wrapped in flannel. I approached, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The same pole that had guided my feet into Raven's Rest, that had led me to the fire pit, that had turned my breath into someone else's prayer. It now dragged me toward her. She looked up, and I saw her face, my mother's, or not quite. Younger, smoother. But the eyes were the same, that same sadness, too large for the skull, that same tremor of fear beneath the surface, like she knew what was coming long before it ever arrived. "You're late," she whispered. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed like a fist. She unwrapped the bundle, bones, tiny ones, blackened with ash, some still fused. "He asked for you," she said, voice thin as smoke. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet rooted. My spine stiffened. The cold breath returned, no longer behind me, but within me, like I had inhaled something ancient and wrong. She began to hum, a lullaby I knew from childhood, but twisted, slower. Off-key. The ground opened behind her. Silently, like a mouth parting, and roots spilled forth. They moved like fingers, like intent. They reached for her. For the bones, for me. She didn't resist. She offered the bundle. I shook my head. You already did, she said gently. I blinked, and she was gone. No bones, no moss, no song. Only the pit remained, and within it, movement. A rising, the ghost bark horror, came not as a creature, but as a revelation. The roots unfolded like limbs, its body stretching tall and thin, crowned with a face formed of branches, twisted into a mockery of sorrow. Eyes burned deep within its bark. Amber and weeping, it did not roar. It did not lunge. It knelt, and behind it, the trees split open. Out poured a procession. The missing campers, hikers, children, adults, each moving slowly, eyes blank, feet bare, skin faded like old photographs. They circled me, forming a ring of silence, their mouths sewn shut with vines, and each one held a lantern, flickering weakly in the dark. They raised them in unison. Moonlight flickered across the clearing, and in the shadows between each beam of light, I saw truth. The campfires hadn't gone out. They had been fed, one by one. Those who burned were made into roots, and those who watched became bark, and those who ran became me. The ghost bark horror reached out a hand, long clawed, dripping with sap that stank of decay and memory. Come home, it said, though its mouth never moved. The voice came from the lanterns, from the stitched mouths, from inside me, and still, the cold breath did not leave. It only grew colder, so cold I saw frost creep across my fingers. I had no more voice, no more will, only one step left to take, into the pit, into the hollow, into the root-wrapped embrace of something that had always known me. The forest did not resist. It welcomed. The cold embraced me fully now, a chill that seeped past skin, muscle, and bone, curling deep into the marrow of my soul. The forest's breath was no longer a whisper, but a storm, rushing through the hollow like 1,000 sighs, 1,000 lamentations carried on wind thick with rot and ancient grief. I stood at the edge of the pit, the ring of lanterns casting trembling shadows that danced like phantoms on the gnarled bark of the ghost bark horror's grotesque face. My legs gave way beneath me, folding as if of their own accord, and I sank slowly into the earth, into the roots that grasped like cold fingers, wrapping and pulling with a patient hunger. The lanterns flickered, their light dimming until all that remained was a faint glow from the creature's burning amber eyes, watching, waiting, knowing. The air tasted of ash and forgotten promises, heavy with the scent of pine and decay. My hands brushed against the damp earth, feeling the pulse of the forest beneath my skin, the slow, steady heartbeat of something vast and unyielding, a voice, neither male nor female, neither fully here nor entirely gone, hummed in the marrow of my bones, an old song, a dirge for those lost and found, for those claimed by the dark embrace of Raven's Rest. The memories flooded. Faces, names, moments blurred and twisted like reflections in fractured glass. I saw myself reflected in every broken twig, every whisper of wind, every shard of moonlight caught between the branches. I was both hunter and hunted, seeker and prey, the question and the answer wrapped in the same cold breath. A faint laughter rose again, hollow and chilling, threading through the forest like a serpent's hiss. It was no longer distant but close, inside me, around me, part of the very air I breathed. The ghost bark horror reached toward me with limbs of splintered wood, its hunger fulfilled not by flesh alone, but by the soul it had long sought. I reached out, not in fear, but in surrender, letting the roots pull me deeper, the bark envelop me, the darkness cradle me, as the moonlight revealed the truth behind the shadows. The forest claimed me, body and soul, folding me into its eternal embrace. And I understood then that to run was to invite the inevitable. I ran. But the forest had already claimed my soul, and in that final moment, as the cold breath settled upon my neck, and the laughter echoed into the night, I became one with Raven's Rest, lost, forgotten, and forever part of the deep wood's endless hunger. Story 2. It was nearly dusk when I first saw it. Though dusk comes slow and strange out here, filtered through thick curtains of hanging moss and the tangled arms of the cypress trees, bleeding light into the swamp, like a dying wound. The sun had not yet vanished entirely, but its warmth was gone, and the shadows crept long and deliberate, pooling in the hollows between trees, filling every crack in the undergrowth with quiet menace. I had stopped to check my bearings, or perhaps just to breathe. Really, the air was so thick it felt like it coated my lungs, humid and sour, with the smell of rotting leaves and stagnant water, tinged with the faintest trace of something metallic beneath. The insects buzzed relentlessly, an ever-present high whine that drilled into my skull. And even though I told myself to stay focused, I found myself staring out across the mirrored black surface of the water, momentarily transfixed by the reflection of the trees, dark and inverted like an ancient script written in shadow. Then I saw it, a figure, half concealed behind the curtain of moss and the twisted trunk of an old cypress, motionless, watching. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My mind didn't even offer me the luxury of disbelief. There was no mistaking it. There was someone standing there, just far enough away that I couldn't make out their face, but close enough that I felt their eyes crawling across my skin like ants. The kind of stillness that doesn't belong to people who mean you well. That unnatural, studied stillness, the kind predators use. It might have been a man, though the silhouette was wrong somehow. Too lean, too tall, too elongated at the limbs, but it wasn't moving. And I told myself that if I just stood still long enough, It might go away, like a trick of the swamp's light. My fingers tightened around the strap of my pack, knuckles aching with the pressure, the weight of the swamp pressing down on me from all sides. I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and erratic, pulsing in my ears like something trying to claw its way out. The figure didn't move. Not a twitch. I turned slowly, pretended I hadn't seen it, forced my feet to continue down the path. Or what passed for one, a barely there trail of matted grass and disturbed earth that weaved between the gnarled trees like some half-forgotten animal track. The wet ground sucked at my boots, cold and thick like blood pudding, and every step felt like it echoed far too loudly. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The moment I did, I knew whatever it was would be closer. I had come to Witchgrove under a veil of desperation, not logic. I was supposed to be finding shelter before nightfall, before the shadow creatures emerged, before the swamp shifted into that darker version of itself that folklore whispered about. I hadn't believed those stories when I first started my research here. Of course not. Disgraced or not, I was still a scientist, still tethered, however frayed, to the idea of cause and effect, of observable phenomena. But I'd also lost everything: funding, credibility, sanity. Maybe, when you've been laughed out of every lab and called delusional for documenting what no one else could see, a part of you starts to wonder if maybe the laughter is right, or maybe they were just too afraid to look as closely as I had. I kept walking. The shadows grew darker, thicker, almost oily in their density. And the deeper I went, the quieter everything became. The buzzing of the insects faded, and even the distant croak of frogs and the occasional splash of fish disappeared, swallowed by something vast and silent. The only sound left was the slow, deliberate crackling of leaves behind me, like footsteps through brittle paper, and there was no wind. That was the part that made my skin prickle. The stillness of the air, the suffocating humidity. It didn't allow for leaves to rustle, not naturally. I didn't run. Running would have broken the spell, and there's something in these woods that doesn't like broken things. It'd seen what happened to the old trappers who vanished out here, read the coroner's notes about bodies found months later, with frostbitten lungs and skin split open from the inside as though they'd frozen from their very blood. That was before I ever heard the name Frostfang whispered on the bayou wind. My breath was getting shallow. The air felt colder than it had before. Or maybe it was my nerves. I told myself I was imagining it. The sudden sharpness to the air, the metallic sting it left in my nose like inhaling snow. But I knew better. I turned off the trail, what little there was of it, and picked my way through a thicket of underbrush that tore at my sleeves and snagged at my ankles. The earth beneath me was soft and slick, and more than once I nearly lost my footing. My flashlight was weak, batteries already dying, and its pale beam wavered against the trees, catching only glimpses of movement that might have been nothing more than swamp rabbits, or might have been something else entirely. Then I heard the voice, faint, so faint, I might have mistaken it for the wind if the air weren't so still. Help, Me the four. Wanjins. It came from somewhere up ahead, soft, pleading, almost childlike in its frailty. And then it was gone, snatched away by silence so complete it pressed on my ears like pressure at the bottom of a deep lake. I froze. Every hair on my arms stood upright. It wasn't the words that disturbed me, but the way they were said. So hopeless, so resigned, not a call for rescue, but a warning. I turned my light toward the sound, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something. A flash of white between the trees, like fur caught in moonlight. Then, nothing. The figure was gone. But the feeling of being watched hadn't left. If anything, it had grown stronger, heavier, as if the trees themselves had eyes. The wind still didn't blow, and yet the leaves whispered softly in waves, in a rhythm that suggested movement, as though something invisible was walking just out of sight. I told myself again that I needed to find shelter before dark fully descended. But even as I moved, I knew I wouldn't make it. Something was waiting, not chasing. Waiting. Light. The light was nearly gone by the time I reached the low embankment, where the earth rose just slightly above the waterlogged sprawl of the bayou, offering a patch of firmer ground among the decaying roots and black pools. It was here, I decided, no hoped. I might find shelter, though. Hope was quickly devoured by the sight of twisted trees clustered so tightly together. Their limbs had fused in places, bark split and weeping, a foul-smelling sap that glistened like old blood in the last slivers of light. The stench here was worse than before, rancid and wet, like a mixture of mold, copper, and the meaty rot of something left too long beneath the sun. But there was no sun, not anymore. Only the thick violet dusk curling like smoke through the undergrowth. My boots sank with every step, pulled downward by the sucking hunger of the earth, as if the swamp itself had grown tired of my trespass and meant to claim me 1 inch at a time. I moved slower now, not from caution, but exhaustion. Mental, physical, spiritual. The weight of unseen things pressed on my shoulders, not like a hand, but like a gaze, persistent and heavy. A watching that had no eyes, but made itself felt in every nerve. I hadn't heard the voice again, not since that first whisper, thin and threadbare, bleeding out into the trees, like it hadn't been meant for me at all. But it lingered in my mind, carved deep like a groove in vinyl, repeating in silence, even when there was no sound. Help me, help me, help. It echoed in the silence, threaded through the ambient rustle that didn't belong to wind, woven into the unnatural rhythm of footsteps that never revealed a body. And yet, I pressed on, driven by instinct more than intention, the same instinct that had made me take up this God-forsaken research in the first place, the same instinct that led me to believe against all reason that I might still survive the night. I spotted a structure through the trees, or what was left of one, the bones of a cabin, really, walls sagging inward, like a creature mid-exhale, the roof partially collapsed, under the weight of time and moisture, but it stood, and that was more than I could say for anything else nearby. I approached slowly, every step a negotiation with the groaning wood beneath the marsh and the creeping vines that slithered like veins across the trees. I felt them snag at my ankles, brush against my wrists, small touches, light as breath, and yet each one made me flinch as if stung. The door was gone, swallowed by moss and rot, and the inside lay exposed like a picked-over carcass. Still it was shelter, and shelter meant the illusion of safety, and illusion was all I had left. I stepped inside. The air was cooler in here, inexplicably so. Not a breeze, not a current, but a deep internal cold that emanated from the walls, the floor, the very air. My breath fogged briefly in front of me, curling like smoke into the dim light. I scanned the interior, flashlight beam jittering from warped furniture to mold-eaten beams, from shattered glass to a child's rusted tricycle, half sunk into the warped floorboards like it had been waiting for me. And then the leaves rustled again. Outside, I froze, listening. The sound came in small bursts, as though someone or something was walking in a wide circle around the cabin, brushing past the foliage with careful, calculated movement. The hair on my arms stood straight, and my fingers gripped the flashlight tight enough to crack the casing. There was no wind. There was never wind here, and still the leaves moved. I stepped backward, deeper into the cabin, careful not to disturb the scattered debris. My foot struck something soft and brittle, a stuffed animal, waterlogged and split at the seams, its button eyes long gone. It was wrong here, too wrong. Not just the decay, but the stillness of the air, the oppressive silence that made my ears ache, like the forest had taken a breath and forgotten to exhale. Outside, the leaves stopped. Something creaked. The sound came from above, from what remained of the loft. A shudder rolled down my spine. Not fear, but something colder, more ancient. The body's memory of predator and prey. I raised the flashlight, aiming it toward the collapsed ceiling. Dust drifted like ash in the beam, and for a moment, I thought I saw fingers, long, pale fingers, retracting just out of view into the rafters. I didn't call out. I didn't move. Somewhere outside, the footsteps resumed, soft, steady, closer now. Then a voice, again, this time so faint, I could barely make it out. Please. A child's voice, or something trying to sound like one. I backed toward the far wall, breath coming short and sharp, and the cold grew stronger, until it was difficult to breathe at all. My flashlight dimmed for half a second, then flickered back to life. In that brief lapse, the darkness had shape. I saw it. Something not clear, not solid, but present, a distortion of space itself, like heat shimmer in reverse, a ripple of cold, and then it was gone. No crash, no rush of movement, just silence, again, dense and absolute. I crouched, heart hammering, trying to make myself small, invisible, part of the ruin. I was beginning to understand, in that moment, that nothing here ever truly left. The things that passed through Witchgrove were not bound by the rules of time or logic or the living. They watched, they waited, they remembered, and they were very, very patient. I didn't sleep. I don't think I even blinked. I crouched against the far wall of the ruin, one hand tight around my flashlight, the other pressed against the splintering boards for some semblance of balance, as if anchoring myself to the physical world would keep the other one, the one outside, creeping closer, at bay. Every breath I took felt like a betrayal, too loud, too sharp, a ripple in the stale, unnatural silence that now possessed the woods. The cold never left. It didn't come in waves, like natural weather might. It settled, dense and immovable, like a second skin. My breath smoked in front of me, in ghostly curls. My fingers, despite the tight grip, had begun to numb. The rot of the cabin, which moments before had been unbearable, now receded beneath something sharper, something sterile and chemical, like snow burned into rusted metal. That smell. I remembered it. It clung to the corpses they pulled from the old well behind the observatory, back in '92. Skin blue. Lungs crystallized from the inside. The file photos were labeled frost exposure. But there had been no frost, not in August, not in Louisiana. But I'd remembered that smell. I had documented it, logged it. Colleagues had laughed, called it a poetic embellishment. I knew better. Something scraped across the roof, slow, deliberate, not the pitter-patter of rain, nor the scampering of a possum or raccoon. It was heavier, rhythmic, dragging. I raised the flashlight again, and as if responding to that meager defense, it flickered once more, this time longer. Darkness licked at the edges of the room like a tide inching inward, testing the limits of the beam. A low sound crept through the walls, a distant breath, impossibly deep, not human, not mechanical, like the wind inhaling. If wind had lungs, if forests could dream. The boards beneath me shifted with a groan, and I had the immediate sense I was no longer alone in the structure. I turned the flashlight downward. Frost, thin ribbons of it, spider-webbed along the floorboards from beneath the trap door at the cabin's center. Veins of pale blue wraithing outward like they were alive. I stared, transfixed. The wood cracked as the cold grew, quiet, subtle pops, like knuckles being slowly twisted. Then, 3 knocks, not on the door. From underneath, a precise, patient rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. I recoiled instinctively, back hitting the rotted wall with a jolt that sent dust and splinters down my neck. My flashlight flared white hot for a second, then dimmed into a choking pulse. I didn't want to move, didn't want to draw attention, but every part of me understood what would happen if I stayed still too long. The trap door shivered again, not with force, but anticipation. The cold intensified until my breath came out in thin, ragged wheezes, I backed toward the threshold, each step creaking underfoot. Something shifted under the floorboards as I moved, no longer tapping, following. A presence mirrored my pace, dragging itself through whatever lay beneath the cabin. Then the whisper came again, closer this time, not outside, not from the woods. From behind me, inside the room, Teresa. The flashlight died. I stood frozen in the dark, ears ringing, breath shallow, eyes wide, though they could see nothing. My name, not a plea, not a question, a recognition. Something knew me, and then the trap door creaked open. Only an inch. No explosion of splinters. No violent rush of movement, just enough to let the cold spill upward in waves. My body convulsed as the air struck me, like being dipped in dry ice. I stumbled back into the doorway, breaking out into the outer gloom of the swamp. I ran. Branches slapped my face. Roots tore at my boots. The underbrush shredded my sleeves. I didn't care. The cabin was behind me, but the cold came with me, crawling up my spine, worming into my chest. I didn't know where I was going, only that forward was better than back. Eventually, the trees opened into a narrow glade, overgrown and bristling with broken fences, half-swallowed signs, remnants of old boundaries. I collapsed behind a fallen log, gasping, the heat of my breath briefly fogging the bark before fading into the chill. But it was there too, not the creature, not yet, but the feeling, that same heavy stare, as if the woods themselves had leaned in to listen. And then, the sound of leaves again, rustling where there should be none. I buried my mouth against my sleeve, trying to muffle the noise of my breathing. My ears strained. The steps were slower now, not hesitant, curious, testing the edges of my fear. Something moved beyond the tree line, white. Low to the ground, the flash of fur, like moonlit ash. It watched from the dark, and the forest held its breath. The wind never came, only the sound of it, a counterfeit carried by the rustling leaves, mimicking nature's voice, but never quite matching its rhythm. It was like a puppet show behind the trees, convincing from a distance, but up close, the strings showed. The air remained heavy, unmoving, as if the entire bayou held its breath, while something else exhaled in its place. I kept low behind the fallen log, face pressed into the moss-slick bark, chest rising and falling in shallow stabs. My limbs ached from the sprint and the cold. But I didn't dare move. The creature, whatever it was, lingered just beyond the thicket. I could hear it pacing now, its footfalls muffled by the wet undergrowth, deliberate and slow, each step a study in patience. It wasn't looking for me. It knew where I was. I reached for my flashlight. Dead, I turned it over, fingers trembling, trying to coax life back into it with pressure and silent pleading. The metal casing had frosted over. I wiped it with my sleeve, but the frost returned within seconds, crawling like fingers across glass. The sound stopped. I lifted my head a fraction, just enough to peer over the log's mossy crest. Nothing, only the curtain of trees, tangled and close, draped in moss that hung like old skin, but it wasn't nothing. Not really. My eyes fixed on a single space, a sliver between two cypress trunks, where the darkness shimmered faintly, like the air above a frozen lake. Then it moved, a slinking shape, just slightly too large for a wolf, emerged from the shimmer like a shadow peeled from the trees. Its fur was the color of old snow, blue-tinged and sickly. I saw the jagged line of its spine, the breath spilling from its snout in slow pulsing clouds, white and thick, drifting downward instead of up. Every exhale seemed to bend the air, crystallizing the moisture into a fine mist of frost. The frost fang. I hadn't seen it before. Not with my own eyes. I'd read witness descriptions, sketches in the margins of notebooks, half-burned photographs, feverish testimonies from those who didn't live long after. But this was different. This wasn't legend. It wasn't delusion. It was real. The wolf turned its head. Eyes like frozen pearls stared directly at me. And then it grinned. The expression was not canine. The curve of its mouth had no place in nature. It smiled, like it understood, like it recognized me. I ducked back down, bile rising in my throat. A soft, crackling sound followed, a slow chill spreading through the log beneath me, ice threading through the bark toward my palms. It was coming. I bolted. No direction, no plan, just motion. My boots slipped in the mud, lungs burning as the cold tore at my insides. I darted through twisted paths and between the hanging moss veils, heart thundering louder than the crunch of frost at my heels. I didn't look back. Eventually, the terrain sloped downward into a shallow basin where the swamp water thickened into black pools. I nearly fell in, catching myself on the root of a dead willow, its branches drooping like drowned limbs. The air here stank of sulfur and decay. I crouched beneath the roots, half submerged, water soaking through my pants, and waited. The frost came first. A sheen of ice crept along the pool's surface, locking leaves and insects in a still tableau. Then the wolf arrived at the basin's edge. Silent as snowfall, it sniffed once, exhaled, and the surface of the water near me cracked as the cold reached deeper. I didn't breathe. For what felt like hours, it stood there, head cocked, ears flicking. Then, without warning, it turned and vanished into the woods, leaving only the frost and that impossible, lingering scent of burnt snow and rusted iron. I waited long after it had gone. The silence returned, but it was never comforting, only stretched thinner. Something in the woods had shifted. It wasn't just the frost fang now. There was more. The forest felt crowded, and the voice came again, closer, desperate. Please, Teresa, it's cold. It came from the trees ahead. A different direction than the wolf. A different thing. I rose on shaking legs, soaked and shivering, and stumbled forward toward the voice, toward the promise of something human, But I no longer believed that voice belonged to anything alive. I followed the voice, not because I trusted it, not even because I believed it belonged to someone real anymore, but because standing still in this place felt like surrender. Movement, even toward the unknown, gave the illusion of control, and illusions, I had learned, were currency in Witchgrove. The trees grew denser here, the undergrowth more tangled, as if resisting intrusion. Vines clutched at my ankles, thick and warm like flesh. A distant hoot of an owl, low and guttural, echoed far too long, distorted by the swamp's unnatural acoustics. The moon was somewhere above, but its light never reached the forest floor. Instead, I moved through a twilight so thick it felt like soup, like breath held in the lungs of the woods. "Teresa, help me." The voice was closer now, fractured and faint, not quite a whisper, not quite a shout. It trembled on the edge of desperation. Each syllable dragged through frost-bitten lungs. I could almost picture the mouth that spoke it, chapped, blue, teeth blackened with cold. I pushed forward. My boots squelched through wet soil, and the ground sloped upward toward a ridge. From there, I might gain a vantage, might orient myself, might find shelter. The idea of a structure, of walls, of anything that wasn't trees, tightened my chest with false hope. But something else waited at the top. As I crested the ridge, the trees parted into a clearing, choked with mist, and at the center stood a house. It shouldn't have been there. The structure was old, Victorian in style, swallowed in ivy and decay, its sagging roofline etched in frost. No path led to it, no power lines, no sign of life. It looked like it had grown there, like the forest had given it birth, and now held it hostage. The voice came again, this time from inside. "Please, Teresa. Please." The windows were black. The door hung slightly ajar. I approached slowly, every instinct in my body urging me to turn back, to run, to vanish into the swamp before the house noticed me. But curiosity and something else, something colder, kept my feet moving. The steps groaned under my weight. Paint peeled beneath my fingertips. I pressed the door open. The interior was wrong, not just dilapidated. Wrong. The angles didn't match the outside. The walls bent slightly inward, and the hall beyond the threshold was far too long. Wallpaper bubbled with mold in the shape of fingerprints, and every few feet, a single, dead light bulb hung from a rusted wire, swaying gently despite the still air. Inside, the cold was worse. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was psychic, like it had crawled inside me and now wore me like a coat. I could feel it, studying me from beneath my own skin. "Teresa." This time, the voice came from the second floor. Each step up the staircase felt like wading into deep water. My legs moved slower, as if the air thickened with each footfall. Halfway up, I paused. Frost coated the banister. There were scratch marks in the wood, deep gouges, as if something had tried to crawl back down. At the top, a hallway, stretched impossibly long, lined with doors, some open, some closed, all humming softly, like they contained their own weather systems. Snow drifted under one door. Another leaked, a black, slow-moving sludge. A third pulsed with light. Too fast, too rhythmic, like a heartbeat trapped in glass. The voice came again. Louder, I followed it to the last door. It was closed, but the frost along its edge told me I had found what I was supposed to find. I placed my hand against the knob. It burned with cold. I turned it. Inside was a child's bedroom. Wallpaper peeled in strips. A mobile hung over a crib, spinning slowly despite the air's stillness. The window was rimmed with ice, and snow dusted the floor. In the crib lay a bundle of blankets, and it moved. I stepped closer. The thing inside wasn't a child. It wasn't anything I could describe without my mind recoiling. Blue and glistening, it breathed in fits and starts, wheezing clouds of frost with every exhale, but it had my eyes. The whisper returned, but not from the crib, from within me. You left me here. I staggered back, heart slamming, bile rising. The thing in the crib sat up, its jaw unhinged. The breath that escaped wasn't air. It was a howl, sharp and piercing, a sonic blade that tore through the house and out into the trees. And the woods answered, all around the house. The trees shifted, bark cracked, leaves rustled with invisible steps. Dozens, no, hundreds of them. They were coming, and the forest was awake. The sound didn't stop. It reverberated through the walls. A low, vibrating moan that was less a noise than a pressure, like standing too close to a subwoofer, or being underwater when something enormous swims past. It pulsed through the floorboards and into my bones, resonating in my ribs, a terrible rhythm stitched into the marrow of the house itself. Outside, the woods had gone utterly silent again. Not a single branch stirred, not a bird call, not even the imitation rustle of leaves. It was the kind of silence that preceded something ancient, something that did not come often, but when it did, the earth bent to its will. The child thing had slumped back into the crib, though its eyes, my eyes, remained open, unblinking, gleaming like wet frost in the dark. It breathed in slow rasps, rattling as if its lungs were full of broken glass. I couldn't move, couldn't think. The room had grown colder still, and my limbs were slow, heavy. My breath crystallized the air. Then the house shuddered. Not a tremble, not a sway. It breathed. The walls expanded outward, groaning under invisible pressure, then collapsed inward in a sharp exhale. The boards underfoot buckled slightly. Something vast moved through the swamp outside. Something with weight. Something that did not step so much as press itself into the world. I stumbled back out into the hallway. The doors had changed. There were more of them now, endless, stretching far beyond where the house could physically go. They pulsed softly, some with a sick light, others whispering behind thin wood, voices stacked atop voices, Too many syllables trying to escape all at once. I turned toward the stairs, but they were gone, replaced by another hallway, slick with ice, lit by nothing at all. I ran and I chose a direction and moved, even though the air thickened around me, even though the walls seemed to lean in closer. The farther I went, my breath caught in my throat. The cold scraped at my skin like tiny needles. I didn't know how long I ran. The house refused to end. Eventually, I found a door. It stood alone at the end of a cul-de-sac of warped planks and frostbitten wallpaper. This one was made of something different. Not wood, not metal. It looked like bone, fused and twisted together. The knob a frozen eye that blinked once as I reached for it. I opened it anyway. Darkness, thick and absolute, spilled outward like ink. It didn't rush. It crawled. A tendril of it brushed my leg as it passed, and the cold it carried was so intense, I nearly blacked out. Beyond it, I saw something else. A flicker of motion, a dim glow. A place that was not the house, the forest. Real forest. Trees, mud, moonlight. Somehow, I lunged through. The transition was instant. One breath, I was inside the house. The next, outside, knees in muck, palms against wet earth. The air was no warmer, but it felt honest. The cold of a living swamp, not the psychic freeze of whatever hell that house held. But I wasn't alone. Around me, in every direction, shadows stood between the trees. Not people, not quite. Tall, thin figures, barely more than silhouettes. Their bodies shimmered faintly like heat mirages, but instead of blurring the air, they froze it wherever they stood. Frost spread, leaves blackened, water cracked. They were watching me. One of them stepped forward. Noiseless and smooth, its face was a blur. No features, only suggestion. It raised a hand, long-fingered and trailing ice like smoke. When it opened its palm, I saw something inside, a tooth. Human, blood still frozen on the root. I turned and ran. The forest shifted around me. Trees moved, paths reformed. The swamp buckled like a living thing. I plunged through undergrowth, stumbled across roots, skidded through icy puddles, heart punching against my chest. The rustling returned. All around me, footsteps without feet, motion without wind, the sound of things converging. And then I saw it, a structure, barely lit, hunched in a hollow beneath a ring of moss-hung oaks. A shack, older than the others, sunken into the ground, windows shattered, door hanging by a single hinge, but I didn't care. It was shelter. I dove inside and slammed the door shut behind me. Immediately the cold withdrew. Just slightly, not gone, not safe, but lessened. The things outside did not follow, not yet. I turned slowly. The shack was filled with old furniture, broken jars, something that might have once been a stove, and on the wall, etched into the wood, was a message, scrawled in something darker than ink. She came back wrong. My legs gave out. I sank to the floor, breath hitching, teeth chattering, staring at those words until they bled into the cracks. I wasn't sure who they were written about. Me, or whatever voice I was still following. The shack groaned around me like it was breathing through rotted lungs. The wind, or what passed for wind in Witchgrove, sighed against the walls, low and wet, as though the trees themselves had started to whisper in a language only the dead understood. I sat slumped against the wall beneath the message, the words still pulsing faintly in the dark like veins under bruised skin. She came back wrong. The shadows outside hadn't moved. They lingered, shoulder to shoulder among the trees, surrounding the hollow where the shack sagged into the swamp. I could feel them out there, pressing inward, not touching the walls but stretching toward them, the way ice spreads toward warmth. The glass in the broken window frames had frosted over. The floorboards beneath me had gone stiff and slick. I tried not to think about the house, about the crib, about the thing that had opened its eyes with my face. But the memory lingered like frostbite, dull, spreading, irreversible. I wrapped my arms around my knees and leaned into the dark. Something crunched beneath me. Reaching down, I found a handful of small bones scattered under a thin layer of pine needles. Animal, maybe, or not. One still had a child's beret clipped to it. Plastic and pink, warped by heat or something older. I dropped it. The wind outside shifted again. Not louder, sharper, like something scraping bark, deliberate and slow, circling. I stood, heart thudding, and searched the room. No weapons, no tools, just rot and fragments of other lives abandoned to the swamp. That's when I noticed the trapdoor. It was nearly invisible, beneath a tangle of rugs and debris. But the frost hadn't reached it. The air around it was slightly warmer, almost humid. A breath from below. I knelt, hesitated, then pulled it open. Darkness again. Thick and rooted, the kind of dark that feels alive, but it smelled different down there. Not clean, exactly, but human. Sweat, damp wood, blood. Maybe something living had passed through recently. A sound rose up from the depths. Not a voice this time. Breathing, slow, wet, labored, against every instinct left in me. I lowered myself through the hatch and let the door close above. The descent was short, maybe a few feet. But the moment my boots touched earth, everything changed. The cold above became a memory, like waking from a fever. The air was thick here, hot and pulsing. The walls of the cellar slick with condensation. Light flickered faintly from a lantern hanging crooked on a hook. I reached for it. In its dim glow, I saw a tunnel, rough, hewn, jagged, leading deep beneath the swamp, away from the shack, into the belly of something older than roads or maps. The walls pulsed faintly, lined with moss and veins of quartz that glimmered faintly, like distant eyes. The floor was damp with standing water, and something thicker. I moved forward. The breathing continued. Always just ahead. never closer. The tunnel curved and twisted, as if it were growing around me. Sometimes I thought I saw footprints in the muck, bare, human, and half-melted. Once I stepped on something that gave with a wet pop and didn't stop squirming. Then I saw the door. Not a proper door, but an archway, carved into the root of the earth. Strange glyphs circled the frame, shifting as I stared. Something about them hurt my eyes. Beyond it, only darkness. I stepped through. Inside, the air changed again. It tasted of copper and ozone. The chamber was enormous, impossibly so. Its ceiling lost in shadow, its floor littered with bones and old machines. Glass tubes lined the walls, some shattered, some glowing faintly. Inside them, things floated. I approached the nearest tube. It held a body, a woman naked and hairless. Eyes closed, limbs bloated. Her skin was pale blue, translucent, veins branching like frost across her belly. I stared, and then she twitched. A single jerk of the head, mouth opening slightly. No breath came out. She looked like me. I staggered back, bile rising. Every tube I passed, every single one, held a variation. Some older, some younger. All wrong, twisted, altered, failed. Knock. This wasn't a cellar. It was a lab, and I had been here before. The memories hit like cold rain. Half-formed, flickering images of scalpels, restraints, machines humming deep in the floor. A voice, my voice, arguing in the dark. A deal struck, a theory taken too far. I had built something, released something. I had come to the swamp, looking for answers, and found a mirror. The breathing stopped, not because the thing was gone, because it was here. I turned, slowly. The figure stood across the room, haloed in the sick glow of the tubes. Thin, shivering, skin stretched too tight across its skull. It moved like me. It wore me. But its eyes were made of frost. It smiled, the same terrible, inhuman smile the frost fang had given me. Then it spoke, in a voice made of breath and ice. You left us all here. But we remember. The lights went out. The dark didn't settle. It grew. It swelled around me like a tide, thick and wet and humming, burying the last of the lantern's afterglow until there was nothing but heat and breath, and that slow subterranean heartbeat pulsing through the earth beneath my feet. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The cold had stolen my breath again. But this time it wasn't the swamp's doing. It was mine, because I remembered now. Everything. I remembered. The theories, the experiments, the nights I spent muttering to myself by candlelight, scribbling equations into rotting notebooks, speaking with a voice not quite mine. I remembered, when I stopped trusting mirrors, I remembered the ice, how it started with frost on the windows in July, and how it spread, how she came to me one night, out of the trees, bleeding and barefoot and shivering, whispering that I had called her. The frost fang, not a creature, not a myth. An echo, a construct born from my own obsession. And the others, the ones in the tubes, they weren't clones, not in the way I had believed. They were failures of self, each one a version of me that had wandered too far into the woods and never found their way out. Each one drawn back here by the same magnetic pull. The thing across the chamber was still smiling, not just with its face, its entire form, the curve of its shoulders, the slight tilt of its head, the glint of frost blooming from its fingertips. It stepped closer. Its bare feet made no sound on the wet stone. "You tried to fix what was broken," it whispered, "but you didn't understand what you were breaking." I backed away, reaching for anything to use as a weapon. My hands brushed a rusted pipe, half submerged in the icy water, and I yanked it free. It made a horrible sucking noise as it pulled loose from the muck. "You made a doorway," it said, circling now, slowly. "You let us through." From the shadows beyond the tube-lined chamber, shapes stirred, more of them, the same thin figures from the forest. But closer now, clearer, no longer just watching. They drifted through walls, through floor, through memory, faces half-formed, eyes glowing faintly like coals in snow. I swung the pipe as one drew near, but it passed right through, and the cold it left behind was worse than contact. My knuckles went white. The metal in my hand cracked with frost. "You have to close it," the thing wearing my face said. "You have to bury it." I don't know how, I choked. It tilted its head the other way. "You will." Then it stepped aside, revealing a deeper tunnel behind it. A path I hadn't seen, one lined, not with tubes, but with ancient roots, carved with glyphs, glowing blue, with a terrible, pulsing rhythm. The breath caught in my lungs, not just from the cold, from recognition. I had drawn those once. This was the source. I ran, down the new tunnel, feet splashing through freezing water, walls trembling with each heartbeat. The air thickened, the sounds behind me twisted, footsteps becoming whispers, whispers becoming memories. My voice, my laughter, my sobbing, my screams, all played back out of order. I didn't look back. The path narrowed, then widened again into a final chamber, circular, domed, pulsating with glyph light. In its center stood a tree, or what had once been a tree. Now it was petrified, skeletal, its bark carved with runes and its roots plunged into a pool of frozen black water. Around its base were the remnants of my notes, scattered and melted into the earth. Journals and diagrams curling with age and damp, and above it all, suspended in the air, was a tear, a slit in reality itself, ragged, rimmed with ice, wide enough for a person to crawl through. On the other side was snow, endless, blinding snow, lit with blue lightning, and in the distance, howls. I stepped toward it. Something behind me stirred. I turned and saw all of them. My other selves, the broken ones, the failed ones. They lined the edges of the chamber, silent and expectant. Some wept, some bled, Some stood hollow-eyed, watching me with the weary resignation of those who'd lived too long without hope. "I can close it," I whispered. I think I always could." No one answered. I dropped the pipe, reached into my coat, pulled free the notebook. I'd kept closest the original one. The first glyphs, my own writing, smeared and warped, but still legible, and I began to draw. In the frost, on the roots, in blood, where frost-bitten fingers cracked open, the light in the chamber dimmed. The tear pulsed. Something beyond it screamed, a sound not of pain but rage. I didn't stop. I drew until the glyphs pulsed in sync with my heartbeat, until the roots shifted, until the air turned still. Not warm, not cold, just expectant. And then I spoke the words, not Latin, not English. Something older, the kind of words you don't remember learning. Only dreaming. The tear folded, not closed, not sealed, swallowed, and in its place, silence, complete and final. I turned back to the others. They were gone. Only the echo of their presence lingered, like condensation on the air. And then the cold returned, not the frost. The footsteps, not outside, not behind me. Inside, I wasn't alone in my skin anymore. I stumbled from the roots of that place, as if torn from a womb. Sweat-soaked, frost-bitten, lungs heaving in the sticky heat of the bayou above. The trap door hung open behind me, black and silent, a mouth that no longer breathed. I left it open. I had to. Sealing it would have made it feel real, permanent, as if what happened down there had obeyed the rules of the world. I still believed in. The shack had changed, not just in the light or the angles, but in its mood. It breathed. The air inside pulsed with a rhythm that wasn't mine, as if the walls had learned to mimic the patterns of a living thing. Moss crawled higher on the door frames, sagging from the ceiling like damp entrails, and the floor shivered faintly beneath my steps. My eyes adjusted too quickly, as though the dark here knew me now, welcomed me. I didn't know how long I'd been below. The sky outside had darkened, bruised violet and ash, and though no sun had ever truly burned above Witchgrove, the cold now was worse than night. It was prelude. The frost fang was coming, and worse than that, I had invited it. I stood in the doorway of the shack, staring into the tree line, watching as the last of the color bled from the cypress. No sound, not even insects. Only that soft rustling of leaves, constant dry shifting in patterns that suggested movement without presence, like invisible limbs brushing through the undergrowth. I didn't see them at first, but they were there. Dozens of them, maybe more, figures half-formed in the fog, too still to be wind, too real to be imagined. They stood between trees, behind fallen logs, just beyond clarity. Their heads were always tilted, always listening. I whispered, "What are you waiting for?" A voice answered from inside me. "You." I slammed the door, but the sound it made Wood on wood was wrong, too slow, too wet, like bones dragged across a floor slick with old blood. I turned and saw that the writing on the walls had changed again. The sentence that once read, "She came back wrong," had stretched. Now it read, "She never left." And beneath it, scrawled lower, fresh and quivering, like a wound, "Let us finish what you began." The shack's single mirror hung crooked on the back wall. It had never worked right. Always too dark, always too slow to reflect. Now it shimmered, not glass, water. I stepped closer. My reflection stood there, blinking, breathing, but delayed, like a puppet learning its strings. It reached for me before I moved. It smiled. Behind it, in the mirror's warped depth, I saw the snow again and the trees, but they were different. Blacker, bonier, sharp as antlers. And in that other world, beneath those trees, the Frostfang walked. It was closer now, no longer a blur in the white. I saw its face, not bestial, not anymore. It wore my skull like a crown. Ice cracked, hollow-eyed, jaw unhinged, in permanent scream. Its breath spilled from between jagged teeth, curling against the mirrored surface like frost. I reached for the pipe again, but it was gone. No weapons now, only me. I backed away from the mirror. My reflection didn't. It stood still, watching, and then slowly it shook its head. No, it mouthed. The glass rippled, cracked, and then it spoke. "You never understood. You were the breach. You always were." Something slammed against the shack's walls. Then again, louder. From every side, the watchers in the woods had moved. No longer distant, now just beyond the door. I felt their cold bleeding in through the cracks in the floorboards, tasted their breath in the air. The forest was waking up, and it was angry. A voice, real this time, outside pierced the night. Not a scream, a plea. "Help me," feminine, fragile. I knew that voice. It was mine. A trick, or something worse. I reached for the door, but stopped. The ground trembled. The wall behind me cracked, splintered, then burst outward as roots. Black and slick, poured into the room like snakes. They coiled around beams, broke furniture, pushed through the floor and ceiling, pulsing with glyphs I'd carved into my notebooks years ago. Symbols I no longer controlled. The shack wasn't a sanctuary. It was an altar. The cold deepened. The footsteps came closer. From outside, from inside, from beneath. I backed into the center of the room, surrounded by ancient roots, mirror rippling, voice screaming, wall bleeding light. The air smelled of rot and ozone and the sharp sweetness of snow just beginning to fall. The Frostfang was almost here, but it wasn't hunting me. It was returning to me, to finish what I began. The first step came from the shadows outside. A crunch of frost beneath invisible paws, cold as death's own kiss, sliding in through the cracked windows like a slow, inevitable tide. I could hear it, breathing, low and hungry, a sound that seemed to freeze the very marrow inside my bones. The watchers in the woods had closed the circle. Their patience was gone. The night was no longer a veil, but a cage. I stumbled backward, the shards of broken glass crunching underfoot, the mirror still rippling behind me like a portal to some other hell. My breath came out in ragged clouds, each one crystallizing before it faded. The air was thick with frost now, every surface coated in a thin, glittering layer that sparkled cruelly under the dying lantern light. A figure emerged first, not quite human, not quite shadow, moving with a grace that belonged to something both predator and phantom. The Frostfang, its icy breath trailing behind it like smoke, eyes glowing with a light too cold for this world. It moved closer, and with every step, the cold deepened, the frost spreading like wildfire across the floorboards and walls, the roots writhing as if in pain. I wanted to run, to scream, to fight, but my body refused, rooted in place by the weight of all I had done and failed to undo. The thing before me wore my face, twisted and broken, its smile a cruel mockery, its eyes hollow wells of frozen despair. It whispered words I could barely hear over the storm in my chest. "You called me." The watchers stepped forward then, those pale echoes of myself, half-formed and whispering in voices like the rustling leaves, filling the room until the air was thick with their sorrow and anger. They reached out with fingers like cracked ice, and I felt the sting of their touch, cold burning through my skin, freezing flesh to bone. Desperation flared inside me, memories of all the nights I'd spent trapped in obsession, the theories I'd chased, the boundaries I'd shattered. I reached for the notebook in my pocket, fingers trembling, and with the last flicker of hope, began to trace the glyphs one final time. The room responded. A shudder, a groan, a rising pulse that seemed to echo from the very roots beneath the shack. The tear in reality flickered, struggling against the spell. The Frostfang snarled, a sound like ice cracking, and lunged. I closed my eyes, voice steady, despite the terror, reciting the words, "Not of this world," binding and sealing. The frost melted, the shadows shrieked, and the watchers dissolved into mist, their faces twisted in silent pleas. When I opened my eyes, the shack was still, the air warm again, the forest quiet, but watching, waiting. The mirror no longer shimmered, but reflected only the night and me, alone. But deep in the woods, beneath the ancient trees of Bayou Sauvage, I knew the forest was alive, and it wasn't friendly. And somewhere just beyond the veil, the Frostfang waited, its breath a promise that some shadows never fade. Story 3. I realized the forest wasn't silent. It was listening. It happened the way all the worst things do, slowly, like a needle sliding under skin. I had just crossed the old boundary marker, a hunched stone sunk deep into the soil, with nothing left of its once carved warning, but a whisper of glyphs worn soft by rain and time. The air felt too still, as though the wind had been chased out, and in its absence there lingered something heavier, something listening. The silence wasn't peace. It was patience. The leaves barely stirred as I stepped forward. Mount Greylock is not the sort of place that welcomes casual trespass, and Oakshade, tucked deep in its belly, had been all but erased from modern maps. The old-timers in the valley town spoke its name only in passing, and only with a glance to the tree line, like the forest might overhear. I told myself I didn't believe in hauntings anymore, that I had seen the tricks of grief, the madness of guilt, the power of suggestion, that I knew how people needed to believe in the dead watching over them. But I had also seen the other things, the things that looked back. That evening, I was alone. At least, I thought I was. The late afternoon sun filtered weakly through the high branches, the gold of it diluted, almost bruised in color, and the scent of damp bark and decaying undergrowth clung to the back of my throat like mildew on old cloth. My boots pressed into the loam with soft cracks, releasing the musk of mushrooms, wet leaves, and something sharper, something like rusted metal steeped in wet earth. There was no wind, not even a whisper of it. The trees stood in unnatural stillness, as if bracing for something. Their limbs stretched outward like the arms of sleepers caught in the moment before waking. I paused near a clearing, rimmed by hemlock and ash, where the moss grew thicker, plush and black-green, slick with moisture. It felt like stepping onto flesh. And then a sound, not from the trees, not from above, from below. It began like breath caught in a throat, a low, garbled hum vibrating faintly beneath the soles of my boots. I froze, breath held, and bent low. The moss undulated ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly, like something was moving under it, something that knew I was there. The whisper came again, clearer this time, ragged and wet, like lungs filled with grave water. Help me. The voice did not come from a mouth. It did not echo from any human throat. It rose directly from the earth. My stomach turned to stone. The air around me thickened. I could feel it pressing against my skin, slick and cool and too dense, like breathing inside a sealed crypt. The smell shifted, no longer just dampness and decay, but something fitted, unclean, old, a stench that didn't belong to the surface world. I took a step back, heart knocking against my ribs, and my boot sank deep into the moss, past the layer of roots, into something soft and sucking beneath. I yanked my foot free, stumbling backward. The ground gave a sick little gasp, like something exhaling in relief. Please. The voice came again, weaker this time. Not the wolf. Not again. I did not answer. I could not. My mouth had gone dry, tongue thick as a brick. The forest leaned in around me, not literally, but it felt like it. The trees grew closer, their trunks more gnarled than I remembered, and the knots, I hadn't noticed them before. Dozens of them, twisted lumps in the bark of nearly every tree surrounding the clearing, each just about eye level, each shaped almost perfectly round, each dark at the center, each watching. I turned and walked fast, not running, not yet. I knew better. I knew what it meant to draw attention to yourself. But as I walked, something else began to change. The path I had followed, faint though it was, seemed to shift behind me. I would glance back and find it narrower, less defined. The trees behind me closed ranks, like soldiers, roots spreading wider, and all the while, under the silence, was that whispering breath, that voice in the dirt. The forest wasn't silent. It was listening, and it remembered me. I didn't sleep that night, not because I didn't try, but because the forest wouldn't let me. Even back at the cabin, an old ranger station I'd rented for the week, something pressed in through the walls, not a sound, not exactly, more like a pressure, a hum beneath the threshold of hearing, too low to describe, but too constant to ignore, the kind of thing that settles into your teeth and gums and sets your nerves on edge, like the distant throb of a headache waiting to bloom. I kept the fire going. Long after the room grew warm, the flames danced wildly in the stone hearth, but no warmth seemed to reach me. I wrapped a wool blanket around my shoulders and sat in the armchair, staring at the windows. The glass panes were black, pitch black, even though there should been moonlight. I checked the calendar 3 times. Full moon tonight. Clear skies forecasted, but the trees outside had swallowed the light, and in their wake, a darkness like wet ink pooled against the glass. It was only when I saw the knot on the window frame, right where the grain twisted tightest near the base. A knot had formed. I could swear it hadn't been there earlier. It was small, perfectly round, and deep as a wound. The longer I looked at it, the more it seemed to glisten, as though slick with moisture. A trick of the firelight, maybe. But then it twitched, just once, like a lid tightening. I slept in the chair. Or maybe I just drifted in and out of waking, mind hovering, just above unconsciousness. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the moss. I felt it again, the way it writhed beneath my feet, yielding like skin over something buried. And the voice, that voice. By morning, the knot on the window was gone. I didn't eat breakfast. The thought of food sat sour in my stomach. I dressed in silence, layered up in flannel and canvas, laced my boots tighter than usual. I took my walking stick, the one with the carved ash handle, and slipped a long rusted trowel into my pack. It had belonged to a grave cleaner I met in New Orleans years ago. Said it was good for turning up secrets. I didn't tell myself I was going back. I just started walking. The air was colder that day. Not just brisk, but cold in a way that gnawed at the joints. The kind of cold that doesn't melt off with motion. The trees had changed. I could feel it before I saw it. They stood straighter, taller, with less give in their trunks, like soldiers at attention. The moss at their bases was damp and darker than yesterday, almost black now. The path I'd taken before was gone. I didn't panic. I'd wandered through worse, but even as I bushwhacked through the ferns and underbrush, I realized the forest seemed cooperative. The thickets yielded just enough to let me through. The branches didn't claw at my clothes like they usually did. It wanted me to come back. And I did. The clearing was waiting for me. Everything about it was as it had been, and yet not. The moss was still thick, but now it steamed gently in the morning light. Thin wisps of mist curled upward from the ground, coiling like fingers. The trees surrounding the glade had grown more knots, eyes, dozens, some the size of pennies, others as wide as fists. None of them blinked. I approached the center slowly, stick in hand. The moment I touched the moss, the voice returned. "Don't leave me here." Fainter, desperate, hollow, like someone calling from the bottom of a dried-up well. I dropped to one knee and ran my hand across the moss. It pulsed, a gentle, rhythmic throb, like a second heartbeat in the ground. The trowel came out next. I pressed it into the earth, slicing through moss and soil. The smell hit me first. Not rot. Worse, the scent of something long dead and long buried, disturbed too soon. Earth soaked in decay. I dug slowly, methodically, clearing layer after layer, until I hit something firm. Not stone, not wood, skin, cold, stretched tight, the color of candle wax. I flinched, but I kept digging, widening the hole, until I could see the curvature of a shoulder, an arm, a bare hand curled into a fist, nails cracked and black, fingers twitching. Not the wolf. The voice whispered. It comes when the sky turns. When the eyes open. I looked up. The trees were closer. Closer than before. Too close. Their trunks leaned inward, casting shadow where there had been light, and the knots, the eyes, were all watching the hole I had made, watching me. Then the hand opened, the fingers splayed, palm up, like it was reaching for mine. I didn't move. Couldn't. All around me, the moss began to breathe. The moss was breathing, not in a metaphorical sense. Not the way wind makes grass ripple, or how heat causes the shimmer of movement in distant fields. No, this was rhythmic, deliberate, as if the earth itself had lungs under flesh, under rot, under me. Every swell and release of the moss beneath my knees exhaled a damp breath that rose up through the trees, carrying the scent of graves that had never seen daylight. I stood, staggered back, the trowel falling from my hand with a dull thud. The hand in the earth still reached upward, stiff and pale, twitching in tiny spasms like something rousing from anesthesia. I wanted to leave. Every nerve screamed at me to turn and run, but the trees had moved closer. They were just watching. Now, the forest didn't creak. It didn't groan. There was no noise. Just that unbearable silence that had shape and pressure, like a presence holding its breath. I took a step back, boot squelching in the damp moss, and my heel hit something hard. Another knot. No, not on a tree, on a stone. It jutted from the earth at an angle, worn and smothered in ivy, but unmistakably shaped. A headstone, cracked, nameless, tilted like a broken tooth. I looked around the glade and realized I was standing in what remained of a graveyard, forgotten, buried, consumed, and the eyes on the trees were not watching passively. They were waiting. A low rustle disturbed the underbrush beyond the clearing, a wet, dragging sound, like something heavy pulled through mud. My heart slammed against my ribs as I turned toward the noise, every hair on my body standing upright. I backed toward the center of the glade, toward the hand, the hole, the open ground, because whatever made that sound, I didn't want to meet it among the trees. The hand curled again, fingers clawing at nothing. Then I heard it, a sound so soft it could have been imagined, but it wasn't. A growl, long, low, wet, the kind of sound that doesn't belong to any living dog or coyote, the kind of sound that feels like it's being breathed into your ear from behind, even when no one's there. I turned. There, just beyond the tree line, stood a shape, huge, low to the ground, coated in muck and slime so black it absorbed light. It had too many joints in its legs, and its head hung too low, as if the neck were broken but still functional. Where eyes should have been, there were two deep pits of shadow leaking something dark, not blood. Not quite. The merc wolf. It watched me with that eyeless face, its mouth slack, strands of muck hanging from broken yellow teeth. It didn't growl again. It didn't charge. It simply waited, its presence fouling the air like open sewage. I backed away slowly. My boot slid into the shallow grave I had dug, and the ground gave way beneath me. I tumbled, fell backward, and for one horrifying moment, I felt the dead hand brush against my arm. It grasped weakly, fingers closing around the edge of my sleeve. "Don't leave me," it rasped again. "Not with it." It thrashed, scrambled up, dragging soil and moss, and something softer than either with me. When I looked back, the hand had vanished. The grave was just a hole now, shallow and muddy. The merkwolf was gone. Only the smell remained, and the eyes on the trees had closed. By the time I made it back to the cabin, night had begun to fall. It wasn't gradual. There was no slow dimming, no warm twilight glow through the trees. It fell like a curtain, sudden and absolute, snuffing out the light, as if the sun had been swallowed whole. I hadn't run, not quite, but I had moved fast, faster than my lungs liked, faster than the forest allowed. The undergrowth tangled around my ankles with every step, and more than once I felt something grab, not roots, not thorns, something cold, something that let go just before I could look down. The door to the cabin resisted when I pushed it open, as though it didn't want to admit me. When I slammed it shut behind me, the noise was swallowed instantly by the thick silence pressing in from outside. I bolted it, latched the windows, drew the curtains. Then I sat and waited. The fire refused to catch. I struck match after match until my fingers stank of sulfur and smoke. But the logs only hissed, steaming in the hearth, like something had soaked them while I was gone. Finally, I gave up and wrapped myself again in the wool blanket, curling into the armchair like a woman twice my age. The stillness pressed in from all sides, so dense it made my ears ring. And then the tapping started, not from the door, from the walls, from the very bones of the cabin. Tiny, delicate taps, like fingernails on wood. First behind me, then near the window. Then at the far wall, behind the bookshelf, always singular, always spaced like a heartbeat. I held my breath and listened. They weren't random. They moved in patterns, in circles, around the cabin, pacing. I tried to speak aloud. Something simple, some defiant remark. But no sound came out. My voice was gone, dried up somewhere in my throat. My body remembered something my mind didn't want to admit. This was not a place for words. Hours passed, maybe more. When I finally opened the curtain, I saw them. The eyes, not just one, not dozens, maybe hundreds. Every tree surrounding the clearing stared straight at the cabin, their bark twisted into the familiar bulging ovals, each glistening, each unblinking. One of them had split wide open, weeping dark sap like tears, and in the center of them all stood the merkwolf. It didn't move, it only watched, its form barely distinct in the moonless dark, framed by that impossible cluster of knots. Its body was laced with tendrils of forest muck, dangling like wet fur, trailing over paws that melted into the undergrowth. Its head was tilted slightly, like a question or a judgment. I shut the curtain. The tapping resumed, louder. This time, from the ceiling, I looked up, but the beams were empty. No raccoons, no birds. The sound was wrong, too deliberate. I crossed the room on shaking legs and grabbed the rusted trowel from my pack, clutching it like a dagger. And then I heard the voice again, not from beneath the earth. This time, from the attic. He's in the floor. I froze. The voice was hoarse, broken, the same one I'd heard beneath the moss. But it was closer now, above me, leaking through the thin ceiling boards like smoke. And again it came, more urgent, almost childlike. He's in the floor. Don't let him out. I backed toward the corner of the room, away from the ceiling hatch, and that was when I felt it, the vibration, through the soles of my boots, through the floorboards, not the hum of machinery, or the groan of old wood. This was breathing, slow, deep inhalations, the same rhythm I had felt in the moss. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the wood. A heartbeat. There was something alive beneath the floor, something huge and ancient, and it was waking up. I didn't sleep. I lay on the floor like a corpse, laid out for viewing, ears pressed against the boards, while the cabin pulsed around me like the inside of a living lung. The heartbeat below had grown stronger, faster, a sound more felt than heard, thudding through the timber like something buried was trying to remember how to move. At some point, I must fast into a fugue, not quite sleep, not quite wakefulness, the kind of daze where time folds in on itself and the body forgets where it begins. That's when I heard it again. A voice, not from the attic, not from below, but from inside the cabin itself. It came from the mirror, a warped old rectangle hanging by the door. I hadn't paid it much attention before. Coated in a film of dust, the silvering cracked and bleeding dark veins through the glass. But now the dust was gone. The glass gleamed like wet obsidian, and my reflection wasn't mine. It wore my face. Yes, but not my expression. Its eyes were wide, too wide, and its mouth moved in slow, soundless shapes. I stepped closer. It stepped back. It stared not at me, but through me. Then it spoke. "He moves when you remember." I recoiled. The mirror went dark. Something scraped against the outside of the door. Not a knock. A drag, like claws, or antlers, or teeth. I crept toward the window, lifted one corner of the curtain, and saw nothing but fog. Thick, unnatural fog, pale green, tinged with the smell of algae and stagnant water. It pressed right up against the glass, swirling with purpose. I couldn't see the trees. I couldn't see the clearing. The world had vanished into murk, and in the fog, something moved. I saw its shape only briefly, a tall, narrow silhouette, too thin to be human, arms too long, knees bent backward. It passed across the window soundlessly, its outline breaking and reforming like smoke. The merkwolf, or something else. I turned away and stumbled back to the hearth. I needed light. Fire, anything. The trowel lay forgotten at my feet. I grabbed a tin lantern from the mantel, an antique I hadn't planned to use, and lit it with my last match. The flame flickered, almost went out, then held. In the glow I saw symbols, carved into the wood floor, faint, obscured by wear and grime. Circles within circles, arcs, bending glyphs. I hadn't noticed them before, but now the lantern light made them shimmer faintly, like something beneath the surface was reacting. Then came the knock. A single sharp rapping at the door, so normal, it felt obscene. I didn't move. Another knock. Louder. Slower. Rhythmic. A third. The lantern flickered. The flame turned green. Then silence, until the whisper. Barbara. My name. Spoken by something that had never needed to use it before. I raised the lantern, hand trembling. The flame steadied. Still that same sickly hue. I walked to the door and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. Then a sigh. Deep and human. From right behind the wood, I unbolted it. I don't know why. Maybe it was the fog, thick and pressing against the windows like a tide. Maybe it was the voice in the mirror, or the heartbeat in the floor. Maybe it was the way the forest watched. The door creaked open on slow hinges. Nothing stood there, only the fog, and footsteps, already walking away into the trees, wet and soft, as though someone had come to lead me back. The heartbeat beneath the floor stopped. Outside, the eyes had opened again. The fog didn't burn off with the morning. If morning had come at all, there was no sun, no birdsong, no sense of time. The world beyond the cabin had dissolved into a wet haze that pulsed and breathed with each step I took. I stood at the threshold, lantern held low, staring into that endless green murk, and felt the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressing against my skin like mold. The footsteps had vanished. No tracks, no path, only the silence of the trees and the weight of the fog curling around my boots. I turned to glance back at the cabin just once and saw the door slowly swing shut on its own. It didn't slam, it didn't creak, it simply closed, like the forest had exhaled, and the breath of it pushed me forward. There was no trail, no landmarks. Mount Greylock had swallowed its own geography, digested the map, and erased the memory of man from its surface. I walked, one step, then another, always forward, deeper into the green. The light from the lantern was swallowed by the fog within a few feet, reduced to a faint halo, like a dying firefly. And then I heard it again. Barbara, not a whisper this time. A song, soft, sweet, sung by a child in a lullaby rhythm. It drifted through the trees, like something carried on a memory, one I didn't remember making. I turned toward the sound, breath-catching, and found a shape forming in the fog. A swing, hanging from 2 knotted ropes tied to a skeletal birch tree. It swayed gently. Though no wind stirred the branches above, something hung from it. Not a doll, not quite. It looked like a bundle of moss and old clothes, stuffed with bones that bent the wrong way. The song stopped. I blinked. The swing was gone. But the tree remained, its bark split with a fresh knot, wet, open, blinking slowly. I walked faster. The moss clung to my boots now, sticky and wet, sucking at the soles with every step. The trees had begun to lean again, growing closer, trunks arching unnaturally, as though they were listening. The fog thickened with every breath, and I started to hear things in it. Whispers, arguments, crying, and the breathing returned. Not mine, not behind me. Below, I dropped to one knee and placed my hand on the ground. It throbbed. A pulse, faint but steady. I moved my fingers, brushed aside the moss, and saw that I was standing on wood, floorboards, old, half-rotted, sunk into the soil, a foundation. I began to scrape away at the moss with the edge of my boot, and more boards revealed themselves. A collapsed roof, shattered stone. Buried beneath the forest floor was the skeleton of a house. The ruins. This was where the voice had first come from. Help me. It rose again. Desperate. Closer, now, beneath my feet. I dropped the lantern and dropped to the ground, pressing my ear to the exposed wood. The breath of something ancient and suffering reached me in slow rasps. Not dead, not yet. Pull me out. My hand moved without thought. I clawed at the boards, splinters driving into my skin. The fog thickened around me, churning now like something watching from just beyond the veil. I tore free a rotted plank. Below was not soil, not stone. It was flesh, tail, veined, stretched thin over something moving. It twitched at my touch, and a wet eye opened just beneath the surface. A human eye. It looked at me, then past me. I turned. The merkwolf stood on the edge of the ruins, its body steaming in the damp, black muck rolling off its coat, like water from a drowned corpse. Its mouth was open, not in a snarl, but in silence, teeth wide enough to swallow the sky. The eye below me blinked. The merkwolf stepped forward, and the trees began to hum. The hum grew louder. It started in the trunks, low and deep, like the sound of air being pulled through the hollow bones of the earth, then spread through the canopy, each leaf trembling with some awful frequency. I could feel it in my jaw, my teeth, my chest. It wasn't a sound, it was a command. Do not move. But I did. I stumbled backward from the eye in the soil, from the ruined house, from the terrible knowing that this thing had been breathing beneath the forest longer than anyone had walked on two legs. The merkwolf didn't follow. It waited. It always waited. Its eyes locked with mine, not angry, not aggressive, expectant. The humming stopped. The fog cleared just slightly, parting like a veil, and I saw them, figures, standing among the trees. Dozens of them, maybe more, shadows in the green, some small, some tall, all still. Their faces were wrong. Twisted, stretched, smoothed like wax, melted halfway and left unfinished. Their bodies merged with bark and moss, ribs spiraled with vines, hands that ended in roots. Their eyes were open, not human, not anymore. The merkwolf turned its head slowly and looked at them, a silent order. One by one, the figures raised their heads in unison, the same movement rippling down the line, like a grotesque prayer. And then they sank into the ground. No collapse, no fall. They simply folded downward into the earth, like melting statues, disappearing into the moss, without a sound, without resistance. Only the eyes in the tree knots remained, glowing slightly now with that faint green luminescence, always watching. I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan. I bolted into the trees, branches clawing at my arms, fog slashing across my vision. The heartbeat of the buried thing pounding behind me like a war drum. I ran until the earth changed beneath me, from moss to wood, from wood to stone. Another clearing, another ruin. But this one was different. The stones here stood upright, ancient and moss-choked, covered in carvings, so deep they cut through centuries. Glyphs and runes, circular scripts, I recognized from dream visions and waking nightmares. This was not a place of death. This was a place of keeping. And the keeping had failed. In the center of the stone ring, a tree grew, black bark, no leaves, thick, with resin that bled like tar. The base of it split open, not in a natural hollow, but in a wound. An entrance shaped like a screaming mouth. Something wet and warm breathed from within. Then I heard a voice. Not the pleading whisper from beneath the ground. Not the child's lullaby. This voice came from inside my own head. It sounded like me. You already let it out. Now bury it. Again, I fell to my knees. The hum returned, now high and shrill, vibrating inside my skull. Blood trickled from my nose. My vision blurred. From the corner of my eye, I saw the merkwolf again, pacing just beyond the stone circle, its steps careful, cautious, as if it knew this place had teeth. Then the earth opened. Just beyond the black tree, the ground cracked wide with a low groan, and a hand emerged, slick, skeletal, impossibly long, dragging itself out. It wore no flesh, only shadow and roots. He's waking. The words came from the trees, from the fog, from inside me. You heard him. You brought him back. I screamed, but no sound came out. And then I remembered the symbols in the cabin, the ones beneath the floor, the ones meant to bind. I stood, staggered, turned away from the tree, and the thing clawing up from beneath it. My only thought was of the cabin, the seals, the place where it had been held before. Behind me, the forest began to shift. The trees bent inward, the fog rolled forward, and something began to follow. The way back to the cabin didn't exist anymore. I ran anyway. Branches grabbed at my hair like skeletal fingers. Roots rose beneath my feet, twisting my ankles, tearing at my boots. The trees had closed in, closer than before, their trunks nearly touching. Bark slick with sweat and black sap, each one watching me with knot eyes that blinked open as I passed. The fog had shape now, not just mist, not just damp. It pressed back. When I moved through it, it coiled around my neck, whispered in my ear in voices that sounded like mine. If I had never left Oakshade, I heard my father. I heard the children I failed to save. I heard the dead I never laid to rest. And behind all of it, something enormous breathed. The ground had begun to slope upward. I recognized a ridge, a place I passed on the way in, a gnarled pine tree with its trunk split down the middle, like lightning had cleaved it open. It wept, something black and foul-smelling. I didn't care. I pushed on. I stumbled into the clearing. The cabin stood where I had left it. But it was wrong now, taller, thinner. The walls had stretched upward like they were growing, bending with knots and bulges, as if the forest was digesting it slowly, turning it into one of its own. The windows were dark. No sign of the lantern. The door swung open before I touched it. The inside smelled of wet stone and old teeth. Symbols still glowed faintly beneath the floorboards, but they'd changed, curled in on themselves, warped. Something had rewritten them from within. I dropped to my knees and began to carve into the wood again, using the trowel I'd carried like a forgotten limb. I cut deep over the old markings, bleeding into the lines. My blood steamed. The walls groaned. Outside, the merkwolf howled, not like an animal, like a funeral dirge, low, mournful, almost human. I turned and saw its silhouette pacing just beyond the clearing. It didn't approach. The cabin had teeth, too. I reached into my coat and pulled out the small black stone I kept. For certain rites, a focus, obsidian, slick with oil and carved with the rune of threshold. I pressed it to the center of the largest sigil and whispered the old words, voice trembling, the by name, by binding, by blood. The boards pulsed. Something screamed from below. The whole cabin lurched, and I fell forward, landing hard on my hands. Beneath me, the floor split, and I saw it, a face beneath the cabin, not buried, growing, a face made of soil and sinew and rotted wood, with teeth like gravestones and eyes that rotated slowly like a clock's gears. It opened its mouth and exhaled. My vision went black, not unconsciousness, not sleep, memory. I stood in the forest, but it was younger, brighter. The trees were thin, the ruins intact. A circle of people stood chanting, their robes soaked in blood and rain. I saw myself among them, or someone who looked like me. I saw a man in the center, struggling, screaming, sinking into a hole that wasn't a hole, but a wound in the world. And the merc wolf watching from the tree line. The vision snapped. I gasped. The cabin was on fire. No flames light. Blinding green, ghostly, the walls glowed from within. Every line of grain pulsing like veins. The floor trembled beneath me. Finish the seal, a voice whispered, or it will wear your skin next. I dragged the trowel through the last arc of the sigil. The symbols flared. The light turned gold, then red, then black, and the cabin breathed in. Everything sucked toward the center. The air, the fog, the light, the scream of the creature buried beneath. I threw myself back, shielding my face as the floor cracked open, and something immense was yanked downward by unseen hands. I didn't see what it was. I didn't want to. The door slammed shut behind me. Silence, but only for a moment. Then the knock, 3 times, slow, patient, and from the other side of the door, my own voice whispered, "Barbara, let me in." I didn't open the door. I couldn't. Not when it spoke with my voice. Not when I knew. With that deep marrow certainty that comes when a spirit lies too close to your skin, that whatever stood outside was not me, and never had been. The knock came again, soft, measured, but closer this time, as if the door had moved closer to me, not the other way around. I stepped back, heart hammering so hard it drowned out the hum of the forest, the endless drone that had become the background rhythm of my nightmare. The floor was still pulsing, not breathing now, but twitching, reacting, as though the thing I'd sealed, trapped, even temporarily, was still alive down there, still trying to speak through the boards. Every few seconds, a wet thud echoed beneath the planks. Not movement, a heartbeat, and I wasn't sure it was mine anymore. The window shutters flew open without warning. The forest outside had changed again. No more trees, only faces stretched across bark and branch, screaming in silence. Some I recognized: the boy from the gas station, the old woman from the diner, Father Keen. They looked at me, mouths frozen mid-beg, mid-prayer, eyes weeping black resin. Then the merkwolf walked into view. It didn't blink, didn't snarl, it only watched, its body oozing rot, its shape barely held together by strands of muscle and muck, and riding on its back, if you could call it that, was something pale and tall and boneless, its head wrapped in roots, its arms too long. It didn't move. It only pointed at the cabin, at me. The wind howled suddenly, shrieking through the trees with such force. It rattled the walls, the door shuddered. The knock came again, this time louder, faster. No longer calm, it wanted in, and then I heard them, the voices of the dead, not in my head. Not in the woods, but inside the cabin, whispering from the cracks in the walls, from the grain of the wood, from the dying embers of the sigils I'd burned into the floor. Let it wear you, feed it your name. Your face will be the first thing it remembers. I screamed and dropped to my knees, pressing my hands to my ears. But the whispers only grew louder, bleeding through every barrier, seeping into the soft spaces behind my eyes. I couldn't tell if I was praying or cursing anymore. I just spoke, old words, broken words, any words I remembered that had once felt sacred. And then I saw it, a figure crawling from beneath the floorboards. Not the same as before. Not just a face, this time, a full form, slender, female, wrapped in vines and tattered robes, eyes black and endless. She looked like me, almost, but her skin was too tight, her bones too long, her smile carved too wide. She opened her mouth, and I heard my voice say, "You didn't save them. You never could." And she lunged. I threw the obsidian focus at her. It shattered mid-air, and the cabin exploded with light, blinding, furious, hot. The walls screamed. The sigils reignited in crimson flame. The thing that wore my face shrieked and fell backward into the black fissure, still yawning in the center of the room. But the forest did not retreat. The merkwolf moved to the edge of the clearing, and behind it, the trees began to part. A corridor of darkness, of muck, of roots that formed arches. Like the ribs of a great beast, the forest was opening, revealing the path to the heart of it all, to the place it wanted me to go. I should have run, I should have stayed, but I stepped outside, into the breath of the woods, and followed the sound of my own voice, now singing from somewhere far ahead in the trees. The path didn't lead me anywhere, or perhaps it led me exactly where the forest wanted. I walked for hours or minutes. Time folded into itself in Mount Greylock, a slow dripping coil where sunlight could not touch, where each step echoed like it was the first and last I'd ever take. The trees leaned in, whispering with leaves that spoke only in memory, their bark slicked with old blood and resin, and the eyes, those dreadful knot eyes, watched, unblinking. I tried not to look back. Every time I did, the trail behind me disappeared, not faded, gone, swallowed in a breath of wind that smelled of loam and death. Even the forest floor felt like skin, soft and spongy beneath my boots, pulsing now and then, as though something massive slumbered just beneath the roots. My name was losing shape. I could feel it, slipping from my chest, falling behind me like a shed skin. I whispered it to myself over and over. Barbara, 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 trying to tether myself to the person who entered this forest, but it didn't sound right anymore. The trees whispered it back to me. Differently. Wrong, warped. Baraba, Bara. They tasted it, tried it, swallowed it, and then I reached the end. There was no clearing this time, no dramatic reveal, just a hollow, a shallow depression in the forest floor, ringed with stone so ancient it predated names. At the center, a pool of black water sat perfectly still, not a ripple, not a reflection, just depth. I knew it wasn't water. I stepped closer. The air thickened, every breath like dragging wet wool through my lungs. My skin itched, then burned, then calmed as the sensation faded entirely. I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. Knock. The merkwolf stood on the opposite side of the hollow, still, silent. Its eyes glowed, not with hunger or malice, but resignation, like it had watched this happen 1,000 times before, like I was only the next in line. From the pool, something rose. Not fast, not sudden. It emerged with the patience of something that knew time as a toy, unfolding upward with limbs like tree trunks and a face that was only shadow. No eyes, no mouth. But it saw me. It knew me. The voice came again. Inside, beneath, everywhere. You opened the wound, daughter of bone. Now you will fill it. I wanted to scream, but my voice had long since been buried under layers of silence and dread. I wanted to run, but the forest held me in place, not with force, but with expectation, the way a mouth waits for a meal to chew itself. So I stepped forward, into the water, cold beyond cold, like falling into a memory of drowning. My skin peeled away, my thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm, but I did not die. I changed. I became still. I became root. And in that stillness, I understood. The forest had no master. The merkwolf was no guardian. The thing in the pool was no god. It was all one being, one hunger. And it did not kill. It kept, it remembered, it turned trespassers into watchers, into eyes in the knots, into echoes beneath the soil. My mouth opened, and the forest spoke through me. Another has come, another seeks, another breaks, far away. I felt the wind shift. A new voice cried out in the trees. A girl young, searching. The forest listened, and I, whatever I was now, welcomed her, because I am lost, and the forest is my prison.